observers on the border. The Special Operations Forces then began looking for Saddam Hussein's and the regime's weapons of mass destruction and their ballistic missiles that threaten their neighbors. Additionally, Coalition Special Operations Forces saved 3 key oil terminals that are used for export through the Gulf. And these terminals are key to the future of Iraq. And by preventing certain destruction, the coalition has preserved the future of Iraq. This is the area where the 3 terminals were in southern Iraq and in the Arabian Gulf. On these platforms, we found a variety of things. We found weapons, ammunition, and explosives. These explosives are not meant for defenders. Our coalition maritime forces have destroyed the Iraqi naval forces, as the following video shows. Now, this is a patrol boat being attacked from the air, and in a moment you'll see the secondary explosion completing its destruction. It will come in this image here. They're also very active in ensuring that the waterways remain open and unmined so that Iraq is not cut off from the aid that is prepared to flow in. What you see in the next image is a tugboat that appears to be carrying oil drums. In fact, it is a mining vessel that transports mines. Interdictions like this one done by our coalition maritime forces and others over the last 2 days prevented for sure the release of 139 floating mines into the Khawar Abdullah, which is an inlet that joins the Iraqi inland waterways with the Arabian Gulf. Ground maneuver forces attacked to seize the key Rumaila oil fields and simultaneously began an unprecedented combined arms penetration deep into Iraq. The attack continues as we speak and has already moved the distance of the longest maneuver in the 1991 Gulf War in 1/4 of the time. The oil fields were spared destruction that was intended by the regime because of the effectiveness of these attacks. In the next image, you'll see wells that were set afire on the 19th in the afternoon before the coalition attack began. By the next day, the land component had already entered Iraq and prevented any further destruction. And this is video from the entering forces. And the good news is only 9 of the roughly 500 oil wells that are in the Rumaila oil field, only 9 were sabotaged by the regime. The flame on the bottom shows where that location is. All the rest of them are okay. I should add that the power of information has been key throughout this operation, and it is truly having the effect of saving lives of the Iraqi people and military units who are choosing not to fight and die for a doomed regime. Leaders from several regular Army divisions surrendered to coalition forces, and their units abandoned their equipment and returned to their homes, just as the coalition had instructed. We know that there are other forces on the battlefield that we haven't even arrived at yet, and as this next image shows, there are Iraqi units that are preparing to surrender, even now as we speak. These are lines of roughly 700 Iraqi soldiers that we've imaged in the desert, away from their equipment, awaiting our arrival. The coalition is committed to disarming Iraq, but the coalition is equally committed to bringing humanitarian assistance to the Iraqi people. Our humanitarian work in Iraq is only beginning. The U.S. military, coalition partners, and other civilian organizations from around the world have positioned millions of meals, medicines, and other supplies for the Iraqi people. This image shows some of the stocks of humanitarian daily rations that we are already preparing to push forward as they're required. Our coalition forces will continue to coordinate closely with a broad array of organizations and ensure that as much aid as is possible can be provided to the Iraqi people when it is required and where it is required. Sir?
Thanks, Vince. So as we speak, our forces are operating inside Iraq. We have operations ongoing in the north, in the west, in the south, in and around Baghdad. Our troops are performing as we would expect, magnificently. And indeed, the outcome is not in doubt. There may well be tough days ahead, but the forces on the field will achieve the objectives that have been set out by the governments of this coalition. And with that, we'd be pleased to take your questions. Please.
Sir, George Stephanopoulos, ABC News. I wonder if you could comment on the status of the surrender negotiations with the senior Iraqi military or civilian leadership. Are they continuing? Are you personally involved? And is the U.S. willing to accept a coalition of Iraqi commanders to assume control as part of a deal?
George, I wouldn't comment on what the U.S. government is prepared to accept. I'd leave that for my boss to talk about. I will say that we have ongoing dialogues, as I think was mentioned in the Pentagon press brief yesterday, with a number of senior Iraqi officials. And so those discussions, both with people in uniform and not in uniform, will continue in the hours and the days ahead.
Are you involved?
Please.
General Tom Fenton, CBS News. The campaign so far has gone with breathtaking speed. Has it surprised you, or is it going more or less as you expect?
I think anytime forces are joined in a war, it's a blessing when very few people lose their lives. It's a blessing when it's possible for us to move in the direction of our objectives. I believe that that the time for us to celebrate will be when the mission is accomplished. We believe that we are on our timeline, as we say, and I am satisfied with what I see up to this point, sir. Please.
I'm here with CNN. We have seen bombing both during the day and the night. This afternoon, it appeared that there wasn't much resistance from anti-aircraft positions in Baghdad, in and around the city. Could you describe to us what kind of opposition you're facing on the ground as the bombing campaign goes on?
In two parts, in the air and on the ground. Our forces on the ground, to include our special operations forces, have encountered enemy formations on a number of occasions in a number of places, and the fight has been joined in several places inside Iraq. With respect to the air defenses in and around Baghdad, I think it was pretty evident last night that there was a lot of air defense going up in the air. We're pleased at this point that we have not had any of our coalition aircraft damaged by any of that air defense. It is obvious that the regime continues to move air defense assets around as best he can for the purpose of survivability. We'll continue to do our work with these magnificent airmen, and over time, we'll take down all of the air defense capability that exists today. Sir.
Jeff Mead, Sky News. Can I ask you to talk to the blitz on Baghdad? How does it help you to be regarded as liberators by the Iraqi people when they're being terrified by that display of ordnance? And also bearing in mind that some of the targets may have suspect military value, because if they're obvious regime buildings, they would have long ago been evacuated.
I think there are those who would say that many of the buildings could be evacuated. I think there are many others who would say many of the buildings would not be evacuated. I don't use exactly the terminology that you used. I think rather what we're about is is approaching the problem of this regime from a number of directions simultaneously. That's as I described the business of special operations forces, ground forces, and air power. The times and the locations where we put each of these ingredients will vary actually by day. That is the nature of this plan. It is built on flexibility beyond any that I have seen in the course of my service. And so it's very difficult to comment about the specific achievement of any one of those arms. We thought that the work that was done at the beginning of A Day last evening was exceptionally well done. The targeting was precise. The munitions used, in fact, were all precision munitions, and there were no targets selected that were not precisely appropriate to what the plan calls for, sir.
Kevin Dunn of ITV News of London. General Franks, what can you tell us about the success in attacking so-called regime targets? What can you tell us, what you know of the status, whereabouts or health of Saddam Hussein? And what do you say to those people who say that the people who are most likely to be shocked and awestruck by shock and awe are the Iraqi civilians you claim to be liberating?
I think on the third point, I wouldn't offer anything beyond what I said a minute ago. With respect to what is going on with the regime right now, I think that there is a certain confusion that is going on within the regime. I believe command and control is not exactly as advertised on Baghdad television. I believe that we should all be very confident that the application of force that's going into that country is designed to be so precise that it avoids in every way possible exposure of non-combatants to that. And with respect to the first part of your question, I think I don't talk about strategic targets and so forth. What I talk about is emerging targets. Emerging targets can be leadership targets. They can be military formations. They can be some mobile communications capability that the regime has. And on several occasions up to this point, in fact, we have attacked emerging targets, several within the last 24 hours. And so in order for me to pick one and isolate it, it just actually doesn't serve our purpose or our plan. And so it is part of that mosaic that I described. We see it every day, and we'll continue to see it as these targets emerge. Let me come over here, please. Sir.
General David Lee Miller, Fox News. Have you been able to locate any weapons of mass destruction, or are you hearing anything about weapons of mass destruction from some of the people you're now taking into custody, POWs and detainees?
Weapons of mass destruction represents one of the key objectives that we have here to locate them, to control them. We receive information every day from a number of sources with respect to weapons of mass destruction. Some of it may turn out to be good information. Some of it is a bit speculative. One would expect that weapons of mass destruction would perhaps be found in certain parts of the country, and that is work that lies in front of us rather than work that we have already accomplished is probably the best way I can answer your question. Please.
Good day, General. Kelly O'Donnell from NBC. Can you update us on the status of Basra, and to what extent are Turkish forces in the north complicating your plans?
Basra is the second largest population center in Iraq. And although we have seen the regime position weapons in and around precious facilities, civilian facilities inside Basra, we have not seen large numbers of formations, and so our intent is not to move through and create military confrontations in that city. Rather, we expect that we'll work with Basra and the citizens in Basra the same way I believe has been widely reported in Qasr, What we have seen up to this point is that the Iraqis are welcoming the forces when they come in. And so, once again, this is about liberation and not about occupation. And so our desire will be to work with the civilian populations in Basra. And I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Turkish forces that are reported to be encroaching into Iraq, what degree of complication?
Yeah, I've seen much about that, and actually I believe that the Turkish formations that we see in northern Iraq are very light formations. We see them move in and out of Turkey. There is continuing discussion, I know, at the political level to decide exactly how much of that, when, is acceptable and so forth. And I guess I would say that that's sort of above my pay grade. Obviously, we have consultations, we have contact. I have one of my general officers in Turkey working with the Turks and have had him there for some time. And so we're able to maintain coordination and I believe the necessary cooperation with the Turkish government up to this point.
General Paul Adams from the BBC. Your targeting of regime targets in Baghdad seems to be that you're targeting some parts of the regime, some parts most closely identified with Saddam Hussein himself, some ministries, and leaving others untouched. Is this part of sowing confusion in the regime, perhaps setting one part of it against another?
It actually is simply a part of the mosaic that I talked about a minute ago. It is an issue of taking what we know and what we form into target sets, specific locations, and using appropriate weapon systems against those targets at points and at times of our choosing. And it is a complex process. It is very, very carefully done. It is very carefully planned, and at least up to this point, I believe has been magnificently executed. Please.
Sir, Martha Grant with Newsweek magazine. You've talked a little bit about the agility of the modern military. Could you possibly walk us back to Wednesday when you got the information about the target of opportunity and explain in some detail, if you would, sir, how did you react? What did you have to do to scramble to get that to happen? And how did it affect the actual start of the war?
Why would you ask if we had to scramble? Actually, as I said, a plan that's agile, a plan that is flexible, provides what we call branches to be able to undertake a number of actions at the same time. I talked a little bit about S-Day and G-Day and A-Day, and I also said that throughout the course of this planning and this operation, there will always be a need to engage emerging targets. Now, sometimes emerging targets will be engaged by ground forces, and sometimes engaging targets will be engaged by air forces, and so forth. Now, actually, what I will say about that emerging target, which is much reported on and much talked about, is from my view, that was about as close a coordination as I have ever seen work a time-sensitive or an emerging target. And as you know, I've worked a great many of them in Afghanistan. That target was worked on an amazing timeline, and in fact did not cause the adjustment of a single aspect of what we've been about since this thing started. Please.
General Franks, Jonathan Marcus from BBC World Service. One of the most striking things in your...
See a lot of you BBC guys.
We're like you. We've got lots of different arms, lots of different services. One of the most striking thing in your briefing was your comments: several regular Iraqi army divisions have surrendered, or their leaders have surrendered. Right. The troops have abandoned their weapons. The soldiers have gone home. You showed us a picture of troops in the desert. It wasn't a great picture as far as I was concerned. I couldn't see much about it. This is a very important propaganda issue. If the Iraqi forces hear through a whole variety of means that units are just simply melting away, that would be information that would be very useful for you to have imparted by the world's media. What further information, what further evidence can you give us that leads us to accept that probably tens of thousands or many thousand Iraqi troops are simply melting away and going home?
I don't recall having said thousands or tens of thousands. I think when I walked out to come over here, we had seen enemy prisoners of war in the range of 1,000 to 2,000, which we actually have in custody right now. We have, with certain knowledge, the fact that thousands more have laid down their weapons and have gone home, and we have, with certain knowledge, that little picture that Vince Brooks showed up here a minute ago is in fact about 700 Iraqis lined up in a way that they were instructed by way of leaflets and radio broadcasts to line up if they chose not to be engaged. Sir, please.
Mr. Paul, thank you for being with us finally. Do you have any personal message for the families of the casualties? And for the second question, do you think Iraqi President Saddam Hussein would become a black shadow like Osama bin Laden is right now?
I think that the President of the United States was very clear when he talked about regime change and when he talked about controlling this regime's weapons of mass destruction. I've said on a number of occasions that when our nations, when the international community commits, as we have, to go to war to unseat this regime, that this is not about a single personality. This is about the control over a country for decades in a way that has been threatening to the peace-loving peoples of the world. And so that's probably the best I can give you on the second, on your second question. And I'm sorry I didn't understand the first one.
The first one is about a personal statement for the families of the casualties.
Oh, for the families of the casualties? Absolutely. As I said in my opening remarks, my heart goes out to the loved ones and to the families of those who have fallen. I think all of us who have served in prior wars at different times in different places have a certain feeling about the loss of a comrade. These are wonderful young people, and my personal thoughts and prayers and the thoughts and prayers of a great many nations go out to their families. Please, ma'am.
Yes, Kathy Shen from TV in Hong Kong. There's been so many rumors about Saddam Hussein's whereabouts. Do you have any idea where Saddam is at right now, and how confident are you in capturing him? Thank you.
Actually, I have no idea where he is right now. I suppose we'll know more in the days ahead, and that's the best answer I can give you. Sir, please.
Paul Hunter with Canadian Broadcasting. Given all the talk of leading up to this of chemical weapons, how surprised are you that no chemical weapons have been fired at your troops, and what does that tell you about whether or not they exist, and how concerned are you that they still might be coming?
I think it's, well, of course we're concerned and will remain concerned. I think that there are two ways to look at an enemy, and one way is to try to anticipate what he might think or what he might do. That's not the way that I think we choose to do it. What we try to do is determine his military capacity and then prepare our forces and prepare ourselves to meet the weapon of mass destruction use if he should choose to do so. You know, I think the President said the other day that there will be people, and there have been people who have believed that through the use of terrorism, potentially through the use of weapons of mass destruction, that we, this coalition, can be driven away from our goals. Simply not going to happen. Someone asked me not too long ago, what happens if this regime uses weapons of mass destruction? And my response was, we win. And that's because we have a commitment to this operation, and our people have a commitment. And so I would give you the same answer. We would be hopeful that those with their triggers on these weapons understand what Secretary Don Rumsfeld said in his comments yesterday. Don't use it. Don't use it. Sir.
This is Li Zhongshen from Shanghai TV, China. General Francis, it was reported that more than 200 Iraqi civilians have been killed or injured ever since the war began. Do you have any comment on that? So what kind of measurements has the coalition taken or is going to take in order to minimize the civilian casualty during the military action?
Right.
Thank you very much.
With respect to a question of you know, how do you feel about that? I think that the nature of war, which is why my own president said it's a last resort, it's a final option, is that non-combatants are injured and killed in a war. That's why the members of this coalition go literally to extraordinary lengths in order to be able to be precise in our targeting. We've done that and we'll continue to do that because there is no assurance that this operation, Operation Iraqi Freedom, ends in a matter of hours or that it ends in a matter of days. I think what we do is we remain guided by principles, and the principles involve the accomplishment of our mission on the shortest timeline possible, protecting innocent lives, both our own and the lives of innocent civilians. Sir, that's the best I can give you. Sir.
There's an impression here in the region that you're having more trouble than you're willing to admit, that you're meeting stiffer resistance than you're willing to admit. One case being brought to mind is Qasr, if you can talk about that. And yesterday, following the airstrikes, the Iraqi information minister said that your forces are going to be decapitated and routed. If you can comment on that. Thank you.
Sure. I think there might be an expected response to that question, which actually you won't get from me. I don't think it's appropriate for senior military people to wave their arms in response to the sort of hype that was described, and so I won't do that. I'll simply say that we have been and will remain deadly serious about our business, and all in this room should remain convinced that what we say from this podium, myself or my staff, or what we say from the various press centers associated with this coalition will be absolute truth as we know it. Please, sir.
ABC News. Sir, does the Iraqi military still have the ability to strike Israel with ballistic missiles?
One doesn't know whether the regime has the ability to strike any neighboring country with missiles. We do know that more than 24 Scud launchers remain unaccounted for since the days of the Gulf War. We also know that we want to provide the best defensive capability that we can, and we know that we want to posture our force dispositions in a way that makes attacks on neighboring countries just as hard as we can make it. Now, as you know, there have been, at least to my knowledge, 6 surface-to-surface missile attacks into Kuwait over the last couple of days. And if my memory serves, 4 of those were destroyed by Patriot units. In fact, 1 was destroyed by a Kuwaiti Patriot unit. 1 was permitted to fly harmlessly into the northern Arabian Gulf, and another into an unpopulated desert area. And so, does that provide fact certain that that we can provide the 100th percentile of defense? Absolutely not. There is no certainty. I will say, sir, that I like our posture the way we see it right now. Ma'am.
From the Associated Press. You mentioned at the start of the briefing the efforts to rout the terrorist networks from Iraq. Can you give us some details of what you're doing specifically in that regard? Ansar al-Islam up in the Kurdish areas, can you give us some details on that effort?
I can't really provide you a lot of detail. I can tell you that from time to time in Iraq we will come across what we believe to be terrorist-associated activity or people, and when we do so, we will strike them. and then we will exploit the site subsequent to the strike. I can tell you that, in fact, we did strike last evening a terrorist complex, the one that you just made reference to, and I won't describe exactly what action we'll be taking in the next few days with regard to that particular site. Okay, sir, please, back here.
We are getting close from the 4th day of war, and till now we can't see any sign of weapons of mass destruction. We can't see any using of weapons of mass destruction by Iraq. Was it a big lie or just a cover to justify your invasion of Iraq and to remove its regime, which still cannot use any kind of these weapons to defend itself and against your attacks? Thank you.
A bit less than 72 hours of this operation so far, and as I said earlier, potential for days and for weeks ahead. There is no doubt that the regime of Saddam Hussein possesses weapons of mass destruction, and as this operation continues, those weapons will be identified, found, along with the people who have produced them and who guard them. And of course, there is no doubt about that. It will come in the future. Sir, please.
Sir, Peter Lloyd, Australian Television, ABC. A point of clarification: do you know the location of weapons of mass destruction, or is this effectively an army inspector's job?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do you know the locations that the WMD were talking about? Have you some indications, or is this effectively an army inspector's?
Well, no, I think what this is a coalition force that is designed to take down this regime and to control the weapons of mass destruction, which for certain, sure, exist within Iraq. And the approaches and the amount of time that it will take to identify those weapons and control them remains to be seen, very candidly. Please.
Jeff Schaefer, Associated Press Television. I understand you can't comment specifically on the whereabouts of Saddam Hussein. You might not know that. But do you believe that he's still alive? Do you believe he was wounded in a strike the other day? And do you believe, if he is alive, is he still running the country?
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if he's alive or not. But interestingly, the way we're undertaking this military operation, it would not be changed irrespective of the location or the life of this one man, and that's why we talk about the regime. It would not surprise any of us that whether Saddam Hussein is alive or dead, that our forces have engaged, as I mentioned earlier, in combat operations against the forces of this regime, both in and around Baghdad, which we all saw on television last night, and in a number of other cases in this country. And so it is not about that one personality. In fact, it is about this regime. And so that's what we're going to focus on. Sir, please.
Do you think it was an error that the Stars and Stripes were raised over Iraqi territory yesterday? And what kind of military government beckons for post-war Iraq?
Actually, I don't know. I think that is that depends on the eye of the beholder. I think that that in zeal, people will want to represent that they have achieved a certain milestone. And if you're from our country, then one of the first things that can pop into the young man's mind is to raise his national colors. I suppose I found it to be much more instructive that immediately following that, and recognizing that his job had to do with liberation and not occupation, that he quickly brought down his colors. Please.
This is News Channel from Shanghai TV, China. Mr. Franz, could you please tell me why this news conference was delayed? Because you know this is quite unusual. Everybody expects that there's going to be a news conference at the first night of the airstrike. So lots of rumors were confirmed by not Central Command, but the Pentagon?
Yeah.
Thank you.
A very good question, and having to do with why the timing of this press conference and why not yesterday or the day before or whatever. Actually, many of the media embedded with coalition forces would tell you that that we're a bit sensitive about the possibility of leaking information that risks the lives of our people who are engaged in this work. I could give you an example. Were we to have a press conference here, or in fact a press conference in Washington that that described what might happen on S-Day, or answered questions, the nature of which you've asked me here today, for all very good questions, then the risk of providing just that one piece of information that that winds up risking the mission or winds up risking the lives of the people who have been put to this task, it seems to me just isn't worth it. And so the decision has been that we would move through the first few days of this before our command here made any comment. We'll try our best to provide fact-based information on a daily basis to the press center here. I feel very good about that. But I will also tell you that I feel very good about the work that's been done up to this point. Last question, please. Sir.
General Chaz Henry from WTOP Radio. Operationally, what's the greatest surprise you've encountered to this date? A circumstance or the outcome that you least expected?
Actually, my greatest surprise was when I got up this morning and I looked at my computer and I realized that that my wife had sent me a happy anniversary note this morning that I had forgotten to send her one. Actually, there have been no surprises in the way that you asked the question. One is surprised, I think, when one has not had a year to think through the possibilities. Much has been said and written about this business of one plan good enough and another not, and so forth. And the fact of the matter is that for a period of about a year, a great deal of intense planning and a great deal of what-ifing by all of us has gone into this so that we prepare ourselves and prepare our subordinates in a way that, that we minimize the number of surprises. There will be surprises, but we have not yet seen them. Thanks a lot. Best to you.
He does not greet reporters often, but today Tommy Franks did break his silence for the first time since Operation Iraqi Freedom has gotten underway down the coast in Qatar, where Central Command has been established for this ongoing conflict. While Tommy Franks was talking, our CNN crew just out of Iraq feeding in some videotape taken earlier today in and around Baghdad. We're going to roll in some of this tape right here, and as you look at it, I have not seen it myself. I understand, though, it shows extensive damage throughout the Iraqi capital. As you get a look at that, just go over some facts quickly as to what we learned from Tommy Franks, saying today that no coalition aircraft have been damaged thus far. Also saying, as we reported yesterday, only 9 wells have been sabotaged thus far. The waterways are a major effort to keep them open in the southeastern part of Iraq. 139 floating sea mines have been located and secured. Asked quite directly as to whether or not the coalition forces have found evidence of weapons of mass destruction. Bit of an evasive answer, not quite clear from Tommy Franks, but he did say quite pointedly later, there is no doubt, he says, no doubt that Saddam Hussein's regime has weapons of mass destruction. A lot of talk, too, about whether or not the Iraqi leader is still alive. When asked that question, pretty frank as well from Tommy Franks, saying, I don't know. At one point, he stressed the fact that this military plan is flexible and it has to stay that way, and I believe we saw that on Wednesday night when we saw the first cruise missiles go into central and southern Baghdad about 2 hours before that 48-hour ultimatum deadline was issued from the White House. Again, the pictures from Baghdad from our CNN crew fed in a short time ago. And as we watch those, we go back to New York. And again, here's Paula.
Bill,
Paula?
we're going to stay with that picture and add a little more to what you've just said because we have the time. General Tommy Franks describing the start of the shock and awe part of this campaign is going exceptionally well. He said the targeting has been precise, that all precise munitions have been used, and that no targets selected were inappropriate. He said the Baghdad targets chosen, or that were chosen to avoid non-combatants. We're going to stay with this picture as we talk with General Shepard because this is probably the clearest idea of how specific this video is showing us how specific these targets are and were yesterday about 1 p.m. Eastern Time. General Shepard, the Iraqis are saying that 19 missiles hit their sites. Have you been given any suggestion that it is actually more than that?
Paul, I have. Some of the information we have is that there were 39 targets struck in this complex, and multiple weapons were employed on many of these targets. As I just look and count the impacts there, it looks to me like a lot more than 19. But I'll make one point. This has been referred to by many people as the bombing of downtown Baghdad. That's partially true. This is in downtown Baghdad, but it's a confined area on the western bank of the Tigris River, the governmental and military area of the west bank of the Tigris River there. So it's a very confined area, and I suspect it'll be struck again, Paula.
The other thing I want you to talk about as we continue to look at these exclusive pictures I wasn't even aware that we had, as Nick Robertson and his crew were expelled from Iraq. They captured this from their hotel balcony before they made it to the Jordanian border. The two words that I heard General Tommy Franks use a number of times were agile and flexibility in describing this plan and the number of actions that can happen at the same time. What is it that we should expect?
Well, I'll give you an example of what he's talking about. He had planned, according to the information we have, to basically launch the air campaign, the shock and awe campaign first, and to be followed simultaneously but behind the air campaign with the ground war. Because of the setting on fire of the oil wells, he launched the ground campaign first, and then several days later, or rather a couple days later, the shock and awe of the air campaign. So he was flexible enough to do that. And the other flexibility he demonstrated was the emerging leadership target, the decapitation target, that took but a few hours to basically organize, get the approval, and then get all the munitions flowing en route. So I believe that's what he was talking about in the flexibility. And what he's also saying is, hey, it's going to take as long as it's going to take. There is no necessary timeline. If we get slow in one area, we may move fast in another, but we have the flexibility to do that. That's the way I read it, Paula.
General Shepard, we're going to try to look at some of the images we saw during this news conference for you to explain their relevance. There was a shot at one point where General Franks was describing a tugboat that was carrying oil drums of having been taken out. Actually, this isn't the specific image, but this image we can learn from as well. And he talked about how blowing up that boat prevented the release of 139 mines.
Yeah, what you just saw there, you were looking at was the missile sites and the missile control vehicle there that I believe was struck. And the tugboat had 139 mines on it. It was sunk, as we saw by those, had a secondary explosion that essentially blew it apart, probably a lot of the mines exploding. Now, had you had those 139 mines unleashed in the lower part of the Qasr port there, the port would have been unusual for ingoing and outgoing oil on the outgoing side, and then humanitarian supplies on the incoming side that are essential to reconstructing Iraq. So the interception of this tugboat was a major, major plus. Also, a lot of the approach channels throughout the Gulf are very, very narrow, and if you sunk a major ship in any of those approach channels, you would have a major problem on your hand. So the Coast Guard and naval forces of the coalition are really being on watch for this type of thing to keep the mines out of the area.
General Shepard, do you mind standing by? We need to take a short break here. Just a final footnote here. When asked about whether Saddam Hussein was still alive, General Franks says, "I have no idea." And then he eventually went on to say in an answer to another question that the mission would not change if Saddam Hussein is dead. Now, the other thing reporters ask him about is, what can you tell us about these so-called secret talks going on between defectors and allied officials with current Iraqi leaders? And all he would basically say is those are ongoing, and he wouldn't tell us much more than that. We're going to take a short break. Our Strike on Iraq coverage continues right after that.
If you've been investing in money funds, you've probably noticed your yields have slowed to a trickle. The strong, ultra-short-term income fund offers higher return potential and a 14-year history of proven performance. For an alternative to today's low yields, call 1-888-4STRONG. That's 1-888-4STRONG. We'll help you build a strong portfolio.
Speed dates. Meet your match before the buzzer.
So what do you do?
Lawyer. And you?
Flex on sales rep.
Excuse me?
I sell these frames. They're flexible, see?
Careful.
It's okay. They spring back.
I'm a teacher, and you?
Flex on sales rep.
Huh?
Flex on frames. They don't get bent out of shape.
Oh. I'm in public relations.
Flex on sales rep.
What?
Flex on frames.
Wow.
Be the most interesting. Wear the most interesting eyewear. Flex On by Marshawn.
Good morning, welcome. It is Saturday, March 22nd, 10 a.m. on the East Coast, 7 a.m. in the western United States, 6 p.m. in Iraq. This is the third day of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Good morning. We really appreciate your being with us this morning. I'm Paula Zahn in New York. Joining me is my colleague Bill Hemmer in Kuwait City, plus Leon Harris in Atlanta, who will get things started with a look at what is happening at this hour. Good morning, gentlemen. Leon, your turn.
All right. Good morning, Paula. Good morning, Bill. Good morning, folks at home. U.S. war planners say that there may well be tough days ahead in the march toward Baghdad, but that the coalition, not Iraqi obstacles, is dictating the timeline. In a briefing that just wrapped up minutes ago, U.S. Army General Tommy Franks says coalition forces are attacking on their own terms and that U.S. troops are searching for weapons of mass destruction. Franks also released this video. He says forces are now targeting military outposts in southern Iraq, and he says Baghdad targets are being chosen to avoid civilian casualties. Now, at this hour, U.S. Marines are working to snuff out the last of the resistance in Qasr, the strategic port city that fell to coalition forces yesterday. Troops have been going house to house, and helicopters are now focusing on one pocket of fighters there as they're near a UN compound. Man and nature have slowed down the advance of the U.S. Army's 3rd Squadron of the 7th Cavalry. The advancing tank group has exchanged gunfire with Iraqi troops, and it's gotten bogged down by mud. Yesterday's charge toward Iraq was so speedy that CNN's embedded correspondent Walter Rogers described the process as, quote, a wave of steel. Also at this hour, we're following conflicting reports on a U.S. Tomahawk missile going astray and landing in southwest Iran, specifically in the border town of Abadan. Pentagon officials say that they are investigating that possibility. Hundreds of the ship-fired cruise missiles were fired during the coalition strikes yesterday. Earlier today, 2 British Navy Sea King helicopters collided after they took off from an aircraft carrier in the Gulf, and all 7 people on board were killed, 1 American and 6 British crew members. The cause of the collision is not known at this hour. Elsewhere in the Middle East, protesters marched through the streets of Gaza and the West Bank to show their support for Saddam Hussein. They also called on his forces to launch strikes against Israel. Anti-war demonstrators also snaked through 3 cities in New Zealand. That country, unlike neighboring Australia, has refused to commit troops to the U.S.-led offensive. Now, we have CNN correspondents posted all around the region working to bring you unparalleled access and coverage of the strike on Iraq. Stay tuned right here for that.
And welcome. We begin now with 2 memorable images from the war today.
Right.
Behind you!
Stop!
That was CNN's Martin Savage traveling with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. Members of his unit came under fire in southern Iraq in an exchange carried live right here on CNN. Fortunately, no one was injured when the rocket-propelled grenade exploded nearby. Now, these are the images the Pentagon had been hoping for. Iraqi villagers warmly welcoming the advance of U.S. forces into Iraq. This is the border town of Safwan, which fell into U.S. hands without a shot being fired. Last hour, CENTCOM Commander General Tommy Franks, holding his first news briefing with reporters since this campaign got underway, said between 1,000 and 2,000 Iraqis have surrendered and have been taken into custody. He says thousands more have simply laid down their weapons and gone home. In fact, British officials say they believe an entire Iraqi division surrendered, which would mean anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 Iraqi soldiers. President Bush is meeting with his National Security Council today as he spends the weekend at his presidential retreat, Camp David. Operation Iraqi Freedom is also the focus of his weekly radio address that is about to be aired. We're going to perfectly time this, so Suzanne Malveaux will bring us an update from the White House, and then we'll get straight to that address. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning, Paula. You're right. President Bush is at Camp David. We're told he's going to have a meeting with his full war council. That's what they're calling it now, his national security team. The vice president, as well as Secretary Rumsfeld, Secretary Powell, the national security advisor Condoleezza Rice, the head of the CIA, and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just to name a few. This is really a place where he can think, where he can focus. It has a state-of-the-art technology. It is a U.S. Marine facility. This is a place also where the president went to shortly after September 11th terrorist attacks. That is where he was managing things from there. He feels very comfortable, and he can essentially talk to anyone around the globe from that secure location. Now, this is also a place, too, where Bush Sr., during the weekend after the Gulf War, went to conduct his affairs. It's the presidential retreat where Clinton, as well, was holding meetings for the Kosovo conflict. But Paula, as you mentioned before, General Tommy Franks talking about a number of highlighting issues here. First of all, saying that it was shock, surprise, and flexibility that characterized this conflict here. It couldn't be more obvious than when this whole thing kicked off, when it started, when the president actually made that decision to jumpstart this whole thing, when his intelligence said that there was a target of opportunity, perhaps even Saddam Hussein himself. But again, we are learning that, yes, they do not know where Saddam Hussein is, but very interestingly enough, senior administration officials saying that top Iraqi leadership is in complete disarray, that they don't have control over the country, that is something, of course, that it is a good sign for the administration. But still, a very familiar argument here that we're hearing, that it's not about one man or one personality, Saddam Hussein. This is the same argument the administration has been using about Osama bin Laden, his whereabouts still unknown. But the president, of course, making the case it's a successful campaign.
You timed that perfectly. His radio address begins.
Have begun a concerted campaign against the regime of Saddam Hussein. In this war, our coalition is broad. More than 40 countries from across the globe. Our cause is just, the security of the nations we serve and the peace of the world. And our mission is clear, to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, to end Saddam Hussein's support for terrorism, and to free the Iraqi people. The future of peace and the hopes of the Iraqi people now depend on our fighting forces in the Middle East. They are conducting themselves in the highest traditions of the American military. They are doing their job with skill and bravery, and with the finest of allies beside them. At every stage of this conflict, the world will see both the power of our military and the honorable and decent spirit of the men and women who serve. In this conflict, American and coalition forces face enemies who have no regard for the conventions of war or rules of morality. Iraqi officials have placed troops and equipment in civilian areas, attempting to use innocent men, women, and children as shields for the dictator's army. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. A campaign on harsh terrain in a vast country could be longer and more difficult than some have predicted. And helping Iraqis achieve a united, stable, and free country will require our sustained commitment. Yet whatever is required of us, we will carry out all the duties we have accepted. Across America this weekend, the families of our military are praying that our men and women will return safely and soon. Millions of Americans are praying with them for the safety of their loved ones and for the protection of all the innocent. Our entire nation appreciates the sacrifices made by military families, and many citizens who live near military families are showing their support in practical ways, such as by helping with child care or home repairs. All families with loved ones serving in this war can know this. Our forces will be coming home as soon as their work is done. Our nation entered this conflict reluctantly, yet with a clear and firm purpose. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. Now that conflict has come, the only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force. This will not be a campaign of half measures. It is a fight for the security of our nation and the peace of the world, and we will accept no outcome but victory. Thank you for listening.
Now, Paul, the latest polls show that 2/3 of Americans support the president in his effort here, the war effort, but it is split among really partisan lines. Democrats split 50-50 on that issue. Of course, as this mission becomes more dangerous, as U.S. soldiers enter Baghdad, they are looking at those poll numbers. Of course, they don't want to lose the kind of support they have, but as it stands now, the majority of Americans behind this administration's push to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Paula?
Suzanne, there was a little bit of controversy yesterday when one of the president's aides, or I guess it was during one of those news briefings, basically said the president had not watched the beginning of this campaign on TV, and then that was later revised, right?
Well, yes, that's right. White House spokesman Ari Fleischer was asked about that in the briefing several times, whether or not the president was watching the same thing that so many Americans were seeing, those dramatic pictures on the battlefield, those explosions, and he said he was not aware that the president was, at least not in his presence, that the president doesn't get his news from television. That was really a sensitive subject. Later on in the day, we found out from a senior administration official that, yes, he was watching part of it with his chief of staff in the study right off of the Oval Office. The sensitive issue here is whether or not the president really gets a true sense of what Americans are feeling, whether or not he is in touch with the kind of sacrifice that is involved in putting Americans in harm's way. The White House, the administration, emphasizing that he does. Paula?
Go back to those polls for a moment, because although it showed the support for the president lifting as this campaign got underway, there were some interesting differences in the way Republicans and Democrats perceive this action. Can you expand on that?
Well, absolutely, Paula. It's a good point, because Republicans overwhelmingly supporting the president in his effort here, close to anywhere from 80 to 90%. But when you break it down for Democrats, it is really pretty much split 50-50, not as much support among the Democrats. And as you know, leading up to this conflict, there was a lot of infighting and some very harsh words coming from Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, who said that the president had botched up the job of diplomacy. And at the same time, we saw just yesterday members of Congress from both sides of the aisle signing support for the president and for the U.S. troops, trying to put that behind them. But yes, still a matter of division, some division within the American public and within members of Congress over this conflict.
Suzanne Laveau will be getting back to you a lot throughout the day. Thanks so much for that update. We continue to focus on the right-hand part of your screen. You see smoke billowing up from what appears to be a part of the Iraqi skyline. A number of news organizations reporting that some daylight strikes did happen earlier today. We're not sure exactly what was targeted, but our own General Shepard says he believes, based on the black smoke rising from the target site, it could very well have been some sort of fuel depot. We'll keep you posted on that. Now, members of the unit of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines continue to make their way towards Baghdad. At one point earlier in the day, we were told they're about 160 miles from that city. Let's check in with Walt Rogers, who is embedded with them, to give us a better understanding of how what he has seen squares with what we just learned from General Tommy Franks. Walter, what is the latest, and what have you seen?
What General Frank said was pretty consistent with what we've seen throughout the day. I should point out I'm with the 3rd Squadron, U.S. 7th Cavalry. But there was one question which General Franks glided over, which was not consistent with what we've seen. The question which he was asked but did not answer was, are the Iraqis fighting harder than you originally anticipated? Now, the reason I point that out is because behind me you can see units of the 3rd Squadron, U.S. 7th Cavalry parked along the side of the road where they have been parked for over 6 hours now. Those units were supposed to be moving toward Baghdad at this hour, moving in that direction, and it now looks like they're going to be sitting there perhaps for the better part of the night. The reason for this is that moving down this road, the U.S. 7th Cavalry encountered a rather surprisingly large Iraqi unit, and that Iraqi unit put up a considerable fight, so much so that the commander of this unit did not want to, that is the commander of the 7th Cavalry, did not particularly want to run his troops into that unit, into that Iraqi unit. The reason being there's some unusual topography ahead. We can't discuss what that is. So again, the 7th Cavalry was supposed to be farther along, closer to Baghdad than they are now. Let me give you some of the details of that scrap. The cavalry knew there were some Iraqis out there, wasn't sure of their intent. Then the Iraqis began firing mortars back in the rear towards Charlie Company. When that happened, it was very clear that the Iraqis were going to fight, and they were not there to surrender. When the Iraqis fired their mortars, the Army began by firing some very heavy 155 millimeter Paladin artillery shells at them. That did not wipe out this Iraqi contingent down the road. Point of fact, there were close to 200 Iraqis, perhaps even more in that unit, and barrage after barrage of artillery fire did not take them out. So the Army then sent out its lightly armed Kiowa helicopters, and the Army got a bit of a surprise there. Those Iraqi soldiers in that detachment still alive began firing heavy machine guns and shoulder-fired missiles at the helicopters, and the helicopters were not hit, but they had to bob, duck, dodge, and weave to avoid that Iraqi ground fire, which was trying to shoot them out of the air. Again, no casualties in this unit, 7th Cavalry, no helicopters shot down, but it got rather dodgy up there to the point where the cavalry was sitting here with its tanks, and they had to call in the Air Force. The Air Force then brought in their A-10 Warthogs. Those are rather slow jets, but they prowl over the battlefield with a huge Gatling gun in the front. That Gatling gun blows everything out of the way, or almost everything out of the way. Now, the cavalry thought it could move after that, but the decision as to whether the cavalry should move at this point was bucked up to the divisional commander, General Buff Blount, and even to the corps commander. And at that point, there was a general decision not to move these troops any further today, that is the 7th Cavalry, because of the rather unusually large Iraqi opposition that was up there. Now, this is not a setback in any sense of the word, except that there was a nuisance factor there, and they thought that this unit would be farther up the road.
Well, Rogers, we apologize. We got to break away from you. We have breaking news from Martin Savage, another one of our correspondents embedded with U.S. troops. Martin?
Well, we're now heading west with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. This is, well, here, you can see me out the window here. This is our vehicle looking through the rear view mirror at me as we move along in conjunction with the convoy of the Marine unit that we're embedded with. Take a look up just out here, Scotty Shore, the wells that we can see burning in the distance here. It's a dramatic sight. The sun's already gone down, so the flames look brighter than they do in the daytime here. Not sure exactly what well that is and where it is, but you've heard that there are a number of oil wells that were set alight in southern Iraq. This would appear to be one of them. However, only 9 of about the potential of 700. That's quite remarkable given the fact that this country could have looked like Kuwait at the end of the last Gulf War. This is the convoy that we're tied along with here. We're moving west. We don't have a destination as of yet, at least not one that's been revealed to us. Primarily, we're moving on to another area, probably to regroup, to get redirection, and then from there begin pushing off once more. This is a relatively safe area. Military units have been, U.S. military units have been passing through here all day long along this highway. It isn't just us that has been using this road. British forces as well, British tanks, British armored personnel carriers. It's amazing how much equipment, how much machinery, how many people have been pushing up from out of northern Kuwait and into Iraq, and that drive is continuing on. The eventual goal of this unit, probably most of the other units, will be Baghdad. Paula?
Martin, you had some tense moments earlier today when you encountered a rocket-propelled grenade as you were embedded with 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. Describe to us what happened.
that was one of those unusual things. There had been fighting going on around the position where we had been all morning long, and we were somewhat lamenting over the fact that it was just too distant. We couldn't get to it. We were, as the old line goes, feeling like we were missing the action. So we went out on what was supposed to be a routine demolition, blowing up some Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carrier that they had found abandoned. We were near a village. Scotty McWhinney, my cameraman, was out walking with another Marine, and the next thing you know, you hear whish, and then boom, and it was an RPG that had been fired, and it went directly between Scotty, the cameraman, and the Marine in front of him, a difference of 2 feet either way of either one of those people, and they wouldn't be here now. After that, forced security went into effect. There were shots that were fired. Tow missiles were brought up. It was believed that the RPG had come from a nearby building, and there was a lot of firing going on, but at the same time, the discipline of the Marines stayed focused on the demolition job they had to do. So you got missiles going up, you got tanks blowing up, and you got APCs being set alight, and a lot of ammunition was flying through the air. It turned out to be not such a dull day after all.
Martin, General Frank said although the campaign is going exceptionally well, there could be some very tough days ahead. What is it that the 7th Marines are most concerned about as you head north?
Well, I think that for the most part now they are just staying focused on the job they have. I mean, they're getting...
Martin, I'm sorry I have to break you off. We have breaking news out of Kuwait right now with Bill Hemmer. Bill, what's going on?
Yeah, Paula, first time in 30 hours, the air raid sirens are back here in Kuwait City, coming up just about 20 seconds ago. The air raid sirens that we've heard indicate that danger is here. There is a system in place to let you know danger is coming, danger is present, and the danger has passed. In essence, the all clear. Every time we've gotten the signal, though, it's represented danger is here, which indicates, based on previous experiences, that some sort of missile has been incoming from the north, headed toward Kuwait, be it Kuwait City or the desert to the west and to the north. I should point out, I want to emphasize this, Paula, that every missile that has encountered Kuwaiti airspace has not had an effect in any way on either property or civilians or casualties. And in the background, you might be able to hear the fire alarm go off here in the hotel. We've tried to synchronize the two only so that we can notify our colleagues throughout the hotel whether they're sleeping from after long shifts or whether they're up and working. Let them notify what we're getting from the civil defense system here. You heard Tommy Franks talk about 6 missiles entering Kuwaiti airspace over the past 2 days. He says of the 6, 4 have been down by Patriot missile batteries, including one fired by the Kuwaiti military. One of the others fell harmlessly into the Persian Gulf, and another one fell in the northwestern Kuwaiti desert. But again, just a few moments ago, the Kuwaiti sirens are back here. What this all means is not clear, but oftentimes after we hear the first siren, a few moments later, we're given the all clear. So if that happens, we'll get back to you. Paula?
All right, Bill, I don't want anybody in our audience to think you're taking unnecessary chances here. We know we've come to count on your normal excellent reporting. At what point do you need to seek safety? Do you need to go now? Because if you do, we'll let you go.
No, I do not. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I can tell you we have a system set up here. It's worked quite well with us in terms of communicating with the people we've hired to help us out, help us make these decisions. At this point, we do not have that signal. Therefore, we can stay here and still broadcast to you. The siren died down. Now it comes back again. We'll wait and see if anything comes of this. It sounds like that's the all clear. And again, this repeats the pattern, Paula, that we have followed many times. So again, the all clear coming quickly. What I should let you know, though, oftentimes in the past when we've gotten the all clear, the missiles either come through this area here in Kuwait City or gone west of us into the Kuwaiti desert. But we'll have to wait and see based on what we hear from the Kuwaiti government as to what has happened at this point.
And once again, I don't want anybody to think you've become immune to the sound. It still has got to send a chill up your spine when you hear it.
Yeah, I will tell you, it gets our attention, I'll tell you that. But we're quite aware, not only of the system that we have in place, Paula, but we also are quite aware of the inaccuracy, for lack of a better word, of the Iraqi missiles. and whether or not they've been able to penetrate the Kuwaiti airspace or inflict damage or harm to anyone. So if you take those two factors into consideration, we feel pretty comfortable and pretty confident here in Kuwait City. Again, the all clear is sounding, Paul, and again, that's the best sound we can hear.
We're happy to hear that all clear sign, although we can't distinguish it as well as you can. As you were speaking, Bill, we was handed a bulletin here that we can now confirm that 4 U.S. soldiers were killed on Saturday in central Iraq, according to a reporter from Britain's Sky TV who was traveling with them. Journalist Colin Brazier said the 4 reconnaissance scouts were ambushed while driving Humvee jeeps at the head of the column. Quote, rocket-propelled grenades were fired, 1 at each Humvee. They killed both sets of occupants. Once again, breaking news, 4 U.S. soldiers now confirmed dead in central Iraq. We're not exactly sure what their mission was. It's interesting to note that General Tommy Franks, when he started his news conference just about an hour and 20 minutes ago, started off with honoring the sacrifice of our armed services or armed forces. Right now, we're going to go back to Bill as we try to better assess the situation in central Iraq. Bill?
Yeah, Paula, just again, I want to reiterate, if you hear the sirens in the background, the all clear has been given here in Kuwait City. We are out of danger for the moment. And while we talk about that, I want to get you to Baghdad right now. A member of the Red Cross is joining us here on CNN. His name is Roland Hugeman Benjamin. This is the first time we have heard directly from the Red Cross that continues to work throughout the Iraqi capital. And sir, just in a general sense, what are you seeing and hearing in the Iraqi capital?
Well, exactly the moment of speaking just now, I hear powerful explosions that are rocking the part of the city where I am in. It just started minutes ago, and I don't really know where it is and what is going on.
Describe these explosions, and would you be able to compare them in any way to what you experienced about 21 hours ago, 9 o'clock local time, when the initial burst of that 7-second thunderous roar ripped through the Iraqi capital?
Well, given the distance and the fact that I was not at the same location last night, it's a little bit difficult, but it's definitely some form of large explosion that I cannot identify.
Okay. One report came in that there's a possibility that people in Baghdad have dug ditches on the outskirts of the city, filled them with oil, and then lit them on fire. Is there any evidence that you know of right now that may substantiate that?
It's very puzzling. I'm seeing a large cloud of black smoke rising up further down on the horizon. We have made a commitment to stay here as Red Cross workers to make sure that people, casualties in particular, can be attended to and have sufficient surgical equipment to be attended to. But it really is quite a challenge, I must say, tonight.
Yeah, tell us, in addition to that, we also heard from the Iraqis earlier today. They're saying 207 injured as a result of the bombing last night. They say women were affected, children as well. Can you verify those numbers?
Yeah, we go every day to the hospitals with our doctors to make sure that they do have enough supply of surgical equipment. And to assess those needs, we do have to see the people who have been taken in, because we provide, of course, professional surgical equipment. And I have seen that in the first hospital there were over 100 patients, and there were children amongst them and women. Definitely, I saw them in the morning.
How many of those people you saw were military, sir?
The hospital I went to, I was told that there were 15 military persons. The rest were civilians, obviously, women and children, and the other people we talked to were civilians.
Yeah, and of the injuries you experienced, sir, and witnessed for yourself, what type? Can you describe them for us?
Well, I was just talking to our own surgeon who was there. They have had 10 serious injuries that needed prolonged surgery. And apart from that, it was most of it wound excisions. There was one case of persons that needed skull openings.
Yeah, what about fatalities? Do you have any confirmation on that?
We have not seen them physically, but we have received evidence from the doctors that there were a few fatalities.
Yeah, you say a few. Can you be more specific?
I heard about 2 or 3 at the first hospital I had been to.
What
Our
about the
purpose is
people in
definitely not to
Baghdad?
establish statistics, rather to promote help to people.
Yeah, I understand that, but knowing that our crew is no longer in Baghdad, I'm only trying to get the information from you as best I can. Let's move on to another area. What about the people of Baghdad in terms of food and water? It was our understanding that they had stocked well up on both of these items. Any indications that they may be running low at this point?
Well, people have stocked up on food that can be kept, definitely, and they will be able to go for a few days on that. In such a situation, it's also a matter that you cannot get hold of fresh products such as fruit, vegetable, dairy products. Of course, you run out of them very quickly. Today, there were just a few bakers who managed to open and bake, and there were queues of people in front of bakeries, because for 2 or 3 days there had been no possibility of buying fresh bread. Apart from that, all shops are closed, have been closed for 3 days, and people just live on whatever they have kept at home.
There is a big concern. I know your organization was very concerned about the possibility of refugees fleeing Baghdad. Have you seen much evidence of that?
No, I have no evidence of that in around Baghdad. We've heard of movements of population in the northern regions, people fleeing cities towards the mountains and the villages in fear for their lives. In Baghdad, people actually stay home. On the ground floor, there are very few shelters, and people have negative memories of 91 when 400 civilians were killed in just one shelter by one bomb, and people tend to stay away from them. And anyway, there are only very few.
You know, you say they're staying away from them, but are many reporting to those bunkers or shelters that you know of?
No, people do not really use them, and there are only very few of them, so people stay on the ground floor of their own houses. Buildings here do not have basements in general. They are one-family units. It's much more like a Midwest city rather than like a high-rise city.
Yeah, I know. Listen, as a representative of the Red Cross, I know your humanitarian concern is the topmost concern. It's 6:30 in the evening now. Can you tell us what you saw today in the streets of Baghdad? Were people outside of it all? Did you notice much traffic, or is the city shut down?
It was quite surprising in the morning, actually, because in the past 2 days there was very little traffic, and today, after a very heavy night, there was quite a lot of traffic. There were not traffic jams, but there were lots of cars around, and lots of people took a chance of going out, and as I was saying earlier, trying to find bread. And suddenly, at the early afternoon, the sirens were heard again, and everybody rushed back home. But before noon, there definitely were lots of people on the streets.
Yeah, what did you hear from the people living in Baghdad based on what you all experienced last night with the beginning bombing campaign there? Again, some of the most thunderous sounds happening in the first 7 minutes, 9 o'clock your time. What have you heard from people who went through that and saw it firsthand?
I think that people were very worried about their relatives and friends, and maybe many people went out just to check on maybe their own property or shops or anything they might have, their businesses, check on relatives and family, and in anxiety, definitely. Last night could not be survived without an enormous amount of nervous drain. It was very, very heavy to put up with that.
Yeah, and are there concerns that the same amount, the same intensity may happen again tonight?
Yeah, well, definitely. Everybody is expecting more. Of course, we are not in the secrets of strategists, but definitely everybody is bracing himself just for another night.
Okay, listen, I cannot see the video that we're sending back to the U.S., but it's being described to me as a dark smoke drifting off on the horizon. If you could come back to the president again, sir, what are you seeing from your location there?
Well, it's really getting very dark now, but for the rest of the afternoon I was seeing these big black clouds now I distinguish them, but it's really rapidly getting dark. It's still a little bit visible.
Yeah, are you hearing any explosions?
I heard some just at the minute when we started our conversation. I heard 2 or 3 powerful explosions in a row, and now I hear the call to prayer from the next mosque.
All right, 2 or 3 in a row a few minutes ago. What about earlier in the day? Did you experience any then?
I heard some thuds, but I was indoor and talking on the phone, so it was difficult for me to identify any of them. But I heard a few thuds early in the afternoon after the first sirens.
Well, you've been an excellent source of information for us. Thank you, sir. We really appreciate you joining us here on CNN. That's Roland Hugeman Benjamin. He's with the Red Cross working in Baghdad right now, and as he said quite clearly, quite a bit of anxiety about the potential for more bombing later tonight. He described 2 or 3 explosions a few moments ago, and we'll just have to see right now with nightfall whether or not the bombing continues there in central Baghdad. More from Kuwait in a moment. The all clear has been given. Here's Paula again back in New York. Paula?
Thanks so much, Bill. We're going to stay focused on this live picture out of Baghdad. It is not certain what was targeted, although witnesses are now saying that after the sound of the first 3 explosions, they heard the sound of sirens, presumably from ambulances or police cars. They could hear that racing through the city. Our own General Shepard said, again, obviously it's dangerous for anybody to speculate what was targeted, but he said, based with his very experienced eye, that when you've been looking at the smoke we've seen been rising from that site over the last couple hours, because it's dark, it leads him to believe, or in fact it wouldn't surprise him if it turns out that it was a fuel depot that was hit in this daylight strike. Let's quickly go to Christiane Amanpour, who joins us from the northern part of Kuwait with the very latest from there. Christiane, what's happening?
A helicopter flight over the port of Qasr reveals the area is relatively quiet. And down below, British soldiers do some war tourism, looking at one of those giant billboards of Saddam Hussein. Taking Qasr was a joint operation. The 15th U.S. Marine Expeditionary Unit was under the command of the British Royal Marines Commando Brigade. Now, U.S. Marines rest at the port after more than a day on the move. Some, like 21-year-old Corporal Jeremy Archer, had feared the worst.
I expected a big war, I guess, but they're all giving up, so it was easier than I thought.
Not all are giving up, though. About 3 kilometers away from the main port, there are pockets of resistance. The commander of the U.S. Marine unit sent up Cobra helicopters and fired artillery to destroy the Iraqi fire.
They did resist, but once it appeared that they would have to deal with some overwhelming firepower, they would have a tendency then to give up.
The British commander says the resistance is isolated.
It hasn't been a particularly cohesive fighting force. It's been a D-30 gun firing a few rounds prior to its destruction, or a group of individuals firing.
It took longer than expected to secure Qasr, and the military says it's still mopping up small pockets of resistance in the town. Nonetheless, the military says it plans to bring in the first elements of humanitarian aid, perhaps within 48 hours. Qasr is Iraq's main commercial port. It lies at the mouth of the Shatt al-Arab waterway, which flows into the Persian Gulf. This was an important strategic target for Allied forces and will be the main port of entry for relief and other humanitarian goods. Just yesterday, Iraqi ministers vowed that Qasr would never fall, but hundreds of soldiers have given themselves up, and now they are POWs under US and British control. Now, the British and the US forces say that they have pretty much met their objectives in this part of the country, and those were to secure Iraq's vital commercial and economic targets, the oil, the ports, and of course the Ramallah oil fields as well. There had been reports that there were wells on fire, and we'd always been reporting from here that it wasn't catastrophic, that the actual key things, which are the oil and gas separation points, were not on fire. And today, Tommy Franks at CENTCOM confirmed that indeed there were 9 oil wells on fire out of 500, so relatively few, and those have been brought under control. So the British and the US are saying that they've pretty much secured and controlled all the important targets in this region of southeastern Iraq. Paula?
Jan, you talked about some of the pockets of resistance the coalition forces were met with. What is it that they can expect to happen in the days to come?
Well, you know, they say that it's just difficult when it's in any kind of urban area, even if it's a small one like Qasr. It's very small. There are not that many people there, but they're talking about, for instance, the Iraqis who have any number of weapons, whether they're machine guns, 82mm mortars, other kind of weapons. And what they're doing is, in some cases, getting out of their uniforms, putting on civilian clothes, you know, basic sort of disguising themselves and trying to harass the U.S. forces. But as soon as the US and the British respond with much superior fire, then they're quiet, and it basically goes away, that problem. But it takes some time, because you can't just go and, you know, carpet bomb an area. You've got to do it carefully, and they're obviously very mindful of the civilian population as well.
Christiane, I'm just curious, as you've gotten closer to heavily or more heavily populated areas, if you've experienced what Martin Savage experienced, which was hearing coalition loudspeakers telling the villagers to stay away and they would be safe. Have you encountered that?
No, I have not encountered that because most of what we've seen is the Qasr thing, and that has mostly been, they've taken it really, it's been a sort of a battle there. I mean, not a major battle, but they have done that, and it's not that heavily populated. It's going to be interesting when they actually get to Basra. Right now, the forces are outside Basra, and I believe the latest report was that they had secured the surrender of the Iraqi defenders outside Basra, Iraqi army units, and then they're not actually going to go into Basra, they say to us. That's not a military objective, and what they want is to be invited in if necessary, but otherwise they're going to leave urban centers for the most part alone, which are not necessarily military targets.
And as they head out of these urban centers, what is their chief concern, Christiane?
Well, in the urban centers, their chief concern is to be welcomed, to be seen as liberators. They don't want to have any situation where they're going in against the will of the people. But of course, you know, if you look at a map, there are some urban centers that they don't need to go into for, you know, for reasons of military objectives. They don't need to go into them to get from A to B or to secure them. There are others that they do need to go into and to be able to use them as transit points or to be able to take them. But what's going to happen apparently in this region is that as the US, which is moving upwards now past the Basra region and towards the west and on up to Baghdad, then the British will move in and they will be securing and controlling the southeastern part of Iraq. But so far they're saying in this area they haven't had that much problem with urban areas at all.
Christiane, we understand there is some concern about a weather pattern that's going to be blowing into that part of Kuwait where you are within the next couple of days. Have you heard anything about that and how it might impact operations?
Well, we're right in the middle of it. I mean, I don't know whether you can see now, but we're a bit windblown, and it's been like this all day. Strong wind and this fine dust that is kicked up. It's not a dust storm right now, but clearly that, you know, it has an impact depending on what operations need to be conducted. Mostly it's difficult and uncomfortable for people. The US and the British say that their experience and their technology is obviously so far superior to what is arrayed against them, which is virtually very, very minimal at the moment, that they can deal with it. But nonetheless, they are very uncomfortable circumstances, and it tends to get difficult for armored vehicles. Their tracks, their treads tend to get clogged up, and for helicopters if it's very serious sandstorms. But at the moment, it's uncomfortable, but it's not massively serious in terms of a sandstorm at the moment. So we're waiting to see what happens and whether it does impact operations.
We would love for you to stand by. We'll get back to you a little bit later on this morning, nighttime, your time. Thanks so much, Christiane. We are looking at this picture being broadcast live from downtown Baghdad, that same familiar cloud of smoke that we've been watching over the last 2 hours looks pretty much the same, although we are now can confirm that witnesses explain that they have heard at least 5 explosions in downtown Baghdad recently, 5 large blasts. We are led to believe that there were no air raid sirens sounded in advance of that and no signs of Iraqi anti-aircraft fire. Now, if the timeline we were told about at the Pentagon remains the same, we are expecting the first stage of the shock and awe campaign to last about 24 hours, which would take us to about 1 p.m. Eastern time. But I caution you not for any of us to sort of get hooked on timelines, because General Tommy Franks, in his briefing that he held a little over an hour and 40 minutes ago, explained to us that sort of the key part of this campaign is agility and flexibility, and he said there are going to be a number of things going on at one time. We would love to have further clarification for you on exactly what was targeted in downtown Baghdad. We started seeing the smoke at the beginning of our show at 7 o'clock this morning, and our own General Don Shepard said based on the very dark plume of smoke that we see, it could indicate that a fuel depot was hit on the outskirts of Baghdad. Now, in the last few days, we've heard frequent references to the so-called fog of war, but sometimes the images are startling in their clarity. They tell their own story.
This is crabgrass. I don't want to see crabgrass in my lawn. We put down Scott's turf builder with Halts in the early spring.
That's the only thing I ever use. Scott's puts this protective barrier over the lawn.
And it stops the crabgrass from germinating. Turf builder with Halts. The best defense against crabgrass.
You decided. Once again, CNN is #1 for trust and experience. Americans choose CNN as the most credible news source. CNN is the most trusted name in news. CNN Tonight at 7, a special report. The fallout from airstrikes, live reports from troops headed for Baghdad, updates on talks of an Iraqi surrender. Join CNN's team of correspondents live from the front lines. CNN Tonight, 7 Eastern. CNN Tonight as the strike on Iraq continues. The latest from the war zone, with reporters in the field and with the troops, a Desert Storm tank commander, and more. Only on Larry King Weekend. CNN Tonight, 9 Eastern.
Right now, we do the kind of reporting that we all hate to do and feared we would be doing. 4 U.S. soldiers confirmed dead in central Iraq. According to a reporter traveling with these 4 soldiers, there was a position they were heading for at refueling, and some sort of rocket-propelled grenade was fired, one at each of the Humvees they were traveling in, killing both sets of occupants. Let's go to Barbara Starr, who is the very latest on this from the Pentagon now. Barbara, what do you have?
Well, Paula, officials here are aware of that report, but they are pointing out to us almost every hour on the hour that the embedded reporters in the field are getting information much quicker than they are back here. If this does prove to be true, and no reason to believe it's not, it may not be, unfortunately, a big surprise. The Iraqi military knows it may not find an easy win against U.S. military forces, force on force, so to speak, one large formation against another. They may find it easier to engage in this type of activity, relatively small fire at individual units. Now, activities are also beginning to unfold in northern Iraq. We now know that U.S. warplanes have bombed a very key facility in northern Iraq in the last hours. This was a suspected chemical weapons factory, a compound of buildings in northern Iraq that was supposedly under the control of a radical Kurdish group called Ansar al-Islam, and it had long been believed by the administration that this facility was associated not just with Ansar al-Islam, but also with members of Al-Qaeda. That facility now having been struck at least once, we are told, possibly more missions against that to come. Also in the north, officials are telling us they have yet to see any really large movement of Turkish forces into northern Iraq, but they do know that Turkish armor infantry lined up on the border. They assume that is an effort by the Turks to prevent a refugee flow into their country. And finally, in that region, we can now tell you that about 35 ships, cargo ships, carrying the equipment of the 4th Infantry Division, which had originally been earmarked to go to Turkey and move into northern Iraq, well, those ships now are going to be turned, and they are going to move through the Suez Canal and go down to Kuwait. The 4th Infantry Division now will be part of a follow-on force, not the original combat force. Now, earlier today, General Tommy Franks had his first encounter with the press corps in the Persian Gulf since the campaign began. He got right down to business. He said that he had no idea whether Saddam Hussein was alive or dead or where he was, emphasizing that none of that would change the focus of the campaign. General Franks said there was still plenty ahead.
This will be a campaign unlike any other in history. A campaign characterized by shock, by surprise, by flexibility, by the employment of precise munitions on a scale never before seen, and by the application of overwhelming force.
Paula, General Franks also confirmed what has been said here publicly. U.S. government officials, military, special forces having repeated contacts with Iraqi military units and commanders, hoping to get them to surrender. Paula?
Barbara, we need your help now as we look at this picture of downtown Baghdad, that same billowing cloud of black smoke not appearing to dissipate here. We have a number of witnesses describing hearing 5 explosions at about dusk. Are you aware of any daylight raids?
Well, Paula, we've asked that question here over the last few hours as these pictures have begun to emerge from Baghdad. I have to tell you, at least one source is underscoring the same view that General Shepard offered some time ago. It is possible it is a fuel depot. It is also possible, you know, the Iraqis had dug a number of oil ditches and were threatening to set those on fire. That would coordinate with the dark smoke. Now, the Iraqis may have had 2 reasons for doing that. They know that the smoke would make it difficult for the U.S. to use laser-guided weapons over Baghdad, the smoke throwing off the lasers, but also knowing that the U.S. can readily switch to satellite-guided weapons, which, of course, are not affected by smoke. So there's another theory here at the Pentagon about these oil ditches, and that may be that it's part of an Iraqi propaganda effort to have these pictures shown. At the moment, there is no confirmed report of daylight raids over Baghdad. However, we do know that some airplanes have been heard. We are just not certain whether there have been actual weapons drops.
And from the experts you talk about there, they're not weighing one theory over the other, either Iraqis sabotaging their own oil, as you were calling it, oil ditches, or the alternative, which is a strike on a fuel depot by Allied forces.
You know, at the end of the day, I suspect both things are going to be true. There are repeated reports of air raid sirens, of explosions, of planes flying overhead. And at this point, all we can really tell you is that, you know, officials here keep saying this is going to be a rolling campaign, no lull, no stop. We can tell you there is a continuing target set, and we know that there are planes in the air. The picture you're seeing right now, whether it's a result of an immediate bomb drop or not, we simply do not know.
Finally, Barbara, you say this is part of a rolling campaign, but wasn't it yesterday that we learned in a briefing that the first part of the awe-and-shock campaign, or shock and awe campaign, was supposed to last about 24 hours, which would take us to 1 p.m. Eastern time?
Well, officials here keep saying a rolling campaign. You know, targets, these target sets certainly do go in some element of phases. It's difficult for them. They can't keep hundreds of planes over Iraq at the same time. It certainly is going to happen in phases, but I can tell you there is a very lengthy target set. They are continuing to work their way through it. There are strikes going on around the country as ground forces begin to get closer to Baghdad, and there's every reason to believe there may be a small lull, but it doesn't appear that they're going to stop the campaign. General Franks saying earlier today he didn't even think, if they knew what had happened to Saddam Hussein, that it would change the outcome. They want regime change, and they're going to proceed with this campaign, they say, until they get it.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more interesting things he said. He said, even if Saddam Hussein is dead, we will continue with this campaign. Barbara Starr, thanks so much. As soon as you have something more on what it is we're looking in downtown Baghdad, we'll get back to you. In the meantime, let's go back to Bill, who's standing by in Kuwait. Bill.
Yep. Paula, that waterway in southeastern Iraq, critical right now. We know that. Tommy Franks indicating earlier that in the past 2 days they found 139 floating sea mines on board a barge, an Iraqi barge. They were seized and secured out in the Persian Gulf now. CNN's Frank Buckley is embedded on board the USS Constellation by way of video phone. Let's say good evening to Frank. First time we've talked to you all day. Frank, what's happening now?
Well, Bill, we're inside the USS Constellation tonight because it is dark outside. You can't have a light on the flight deck when you have personnel out there moving about on the flight deck. So we're inside one of the passageways here in the USS Constellation. It was last night when we were granted incredible access to some of the squadrons as they were preparing for their first package, strike package going into Iraq. We, in fact, were able to witness the very first strike package that was about to go into Baghdad, and then we were able to speak with some of the pilots immediately after they alighted from their aircraft, even before they were involved in their debriefings with the officials here on the ship. Here's a look at what we were able to see last night.
The flight deck of the USS Constellation roared to life with the first strike fighters bound for Baghdad.
We are the Oscar Bravo Sierra package.
Earlier, a briefing, embedded journalists getting a front row seat to a moment in history.
Some of you have already flown once or twice, but this is the package now that's going to be going downtown here, and it's kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here, gentlemen. I don't think that any of us will ever step away from this and not remember this particular day.
Ordnance from strike fighters and Tomahawk cruise missiles rained into Baghdad. Anti-aircraft fire flew up. The men who flew over it saw things they'll never forget.
Just continuous, constant explosions going off all over the place. You saw the AAA coming up. Occasionally you see some missile outbursts.
I don't think anything we could have thought of would have prepared us for what we were going to see happening on the ground out there.
The first strike package was led by a Desert Storm veteran, the Carrier Air Wing's commanding officer, Mark Fox.
We didn't fly on night vision goggles back then, so everything that you saw then was with the naked eye, and now you've got an ability to see a lot more. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or not, but there was a hell of a lot of stuff to look at.
Mike Herbert remembers watching missiles like this one crash into targets on TV during Desert Storm. He was only a teenager.
And to actually do that myself for the first time, when I remember in high school seeing it on TV, on being able to see that, now to actually do it, it's a whole different world.
And we were also told by Rear Admiral Barry Costello, who is the Constellation Battle Group commander, that all of the ships and submarines in this area, both in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, that were capable of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles, in fact did launch. That was 30-plus ships and submarines, U.S. Navy warships, that launched Tomahawks into Iraq. Bill?
Frank Buckley on board the USS Constellation, reminding us yet again just how much firepower is going into the skies over the past 24 hours. It is 7 o'clock local time. We're 2 hours away from that 24-hour deadline, Paula, in which the initial 24 hours of the shock and awe campaign were set to begin, going back to 9 o'clock of last evening. Paula, back to you now in New York.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Barbara Starr just added in her last live shot that it is her belief that this will very much be a rolling campaign based on what she's heard at the Pentagon. Thanks, Bill. Both in Washington and London, we have been warned that Operation Iraqi Freedom carries with it the loss of life. So far, on day 3 of the offensive, 6 Americans have died, 14 British troops. While military strategists may see this as limited casualties, it is catastrophic for the families losing loved ones. CNN's Thelma Gutierrez has that story.
The flag at Camp Pendleton flies at half-staff.
3 of the 4 U.S. coalition casualties in Iraq were from Camp Pendleton. They died along with another American and 8 British soldiers when their CH-46 transport helicopter crashed and burned near the Iraqi border. Officials say caused by mechanical failure. The pilot was 30-year-old Captain Ryan Beaupre.
We just were scared that something like this would happen.
He is mourned by family in his hometown of Bloomington, Illinois.
He did always want to fly. He thought that he could do more as a person, and said that he was going to join the Marine Corps.
Also killed in the helicopter crash, 36-year-old Jay Oben of Waterville, Maine, 25-year-old Corporal Brian Kennedy of Houston, Texas, and 29-year-old Staff Sergeant Kendall Watersbay of Baltimore, Maryland.
George Bush, take a good look at this, man, because you took my only son away from me.
His father angrily blamed George W. Bush.
You lose your only son and child, and you don't really know what's really going on, but what they tell you.
When anyone loses a member of their family, it's not something that's taken lightly, and we mourn the loss of these Marines.
Before the end of the second day of the ground invasion, 2 more Marines were killed in action at this family diner in Fort Stewart, Georgia. Military families, many with relatives serving in the Gulf, watch nervously as the war unfolds, hoping there will be no more casualties, but somehow knowing it will not be the end.
Just hope they get back safe, do a good job. I know they've all been trained to do it, and just do your job and get back home safe.
Get it over with and bring them home.
Thelma Gutierrez, CNN, Camp Pendleton, California.
As you can imagine, that angry father we saw in the last report has a lot to say. His name is Michael Watersby, whose son Kendall was killed in a helicopter crash yesterday in Kuwait. His father was with us right now. He joins us from his hometown of Baltimore, Maryland. And sir, I also understand you're joined by Kenneth Watersby, who is the son of this fallen Marine, and Sharita Watersby, who happens to be the sister. Thank you all for being with us. We are so sorry about your loss. Mr. Watersby, I don't know whether you heard General Franks this morning, but he opened his first news conference saying that his hearts went out to the families who have already made the ultimate sacrifice. Does that bring you any comfort at all?
Yes, it does.
And what does that mean to you?
It means a lot now that I see the respect that they're giving my son.
And it wasn't only General Franks who had those kinds of things to say. Secretary Rumsfeld expressed yesterday, quote, that the world will be a safer place because of their dedicated service. Tell us a little bit this morning about your son's commitment and why he felt so strongly about serving this great nation of ours.
Well, he was a real outgoing individual, and he liked to do things that was positive for himself, and this was one of the reasons why he joined the Marines.
How much did he talk to you about what he might face in this campaign?
He didn't talk much about the campaign. He just talked to me about he had to pack up and about that he might be being deployed out. It was like back and forth, and then later on, he had called me back and told me that finally they decided that they was going to deploy his people there out where he was at.
Sharita, you must be so proud of your brother's service to this country. What do you want to say this morning?
I just want to say that I miss him so much because he was an excellent person and he always was there for me, somebody I could talk to. He was like one of my best friends, and he always helped me out in school, and I miss him so much.
How much, Sharita, did you worry about him?
From the first moment that he told me that he was going over to Kuwait, I was really concerned because I knew that it was going to be a war, and I felt that this war was useless, that there was no point to it, so I really didn't want him to go.
But Mr. Watersby, did you support his decision to go?
Well, I did, because he didn't really have no other choice by him being in the military, and that he, that was one of his orders to go, as being a staff sergeant in the Marines.
Kenneth, are you at all comfortable to talk with this morning? Because I'm not sure, Mr. Watersby. Am I allowed to talk to Kenneth now?
Yes.
Okay, Kenneth, so many kind things have been said about the kind of person your dad was. What do you want people to know about your dad?
He was a really funny person. He always used to make me laugh, tell me jokes and everything. We used to go places together, and he was just a great person.
Mr. Watersby, I know that you have expressed gratitude for what General Franks has said and Secretary Rumsfeld about these fallen comrades. But yesterday, at one point in this report we just showed, you held up a picture of your son and you said, I want President Bush to get a good look at this, really good look here. This is the only son I had, only son.
Look at this, man. Because you took my only son away from me.
I know that you once again expressed some appreciation for what the military leaders had to say about the sacrifice your son made. Are you opposed to this war?
In a sense, yes, I am.
And tell me why.
Because people are losing relatives, sons and daughters, cousins, uncles, and that reason why I was like that yesterday, because it was a sensitive moment at that time for me.
And are you feeling any differently today?
I'm still mourning, but I feel a little better as far as to them giving my son, condolences.
But once again, you did feel your son felt very strongly about living up to his obligations and serving in the military.
Yes, I did. Yes, he was a great soldier to the United States government.
I know we've heard from families of those who have lost their own that they very much hope that in these images that we see of war, that we don't lose sight of the human toll. Just a final thought to the American public about the service these men and women are doing and what it is you want us all to keep in mind as this operation goes on.
Well, I just like to keep in mind that they are doing a job that they set out to do, and everybody has a job to do something, to complete something, and that's all I want to let America know, that he was doing his job for the United States government.
Well, we certainly salute his commitment here. Michael Watersby, Kenneth Watersby, and Sharita Watersby, thank you for joining us at this difficult time. Our thoughts are with you as you go through this terrible, terrible process of mourning. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to head back to CNN Center where Leon Harris is standing by. I know, Leon, you have also spoken with family members who have lost loved ones. It is not easy to hear their pain, is it?
It's awfully difficult. It really is. But at least we hope at least that they're coming out and being able to share their grief with the rest of the nation, and pretty much everyone in this nation is behind them. It's got to make them feel somewhat better. We hope that does help families like that get through these tough times. All right, folks, here's what we know at this hour right now. Thick black smoke is billowing over Baghdad this hour. Just a short time ago, witnesses reported more explosions in the Iraqi capital. Less than 24 hours ago, the bombs and missiles started raining down on the city, the beginning of what the military calls the shock and awe campaign. Now, we've also learned within the last few minutes that 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in fighting in central Iraq. The report comes to us from a reporter with Britain's Sky News who was traveling with that military unit. He says rocket-propelled grenades hit the Humvees that the soldiers were in. The U.S. commander of the war in Iraq says between 1,000 and 2,000 Iraqi troops have surrendered and are now in custody, and thousands more have just laid down their weapons and gone home. General Tommy Franks also says U.S. and coalition forces are fighting on their own terms with precision attacks designed to avoid civilian casualties. This was his first briefing since the war began. U.S. Marines are going house to house, securing the key port city of Qasr. Allied forces took control of that area yesterday, but they were still battling pockets of resistance today. Qasr is very important because it is the main port for the UN Oil for Food program. President Bush consults his war council and tracks developments in Iraq from his post at Camp David. But in his weekly radio address today, the president said using decisive force is the only way to limit the duration of the war. We have some good news to report for the CNN family here. Some of our staffers who were expelled from Baghdad arrived safely in Jordan today. The crew had been the last staff members of any U.S. television network in the Iraqi capital, and they left behind a number of freelance journalists who are still there in the capital. The CNN team, including correspondents Nick Robertson and Reem Brahimi, were ordered out yesterday, and they are now on their way home, and we're glad to hear that. More anti-war protests are planned in cities across the U.S. today, including New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Yesterday, demonstrators there and elsewhere rallied against the war in Iraq, and in some cases, the rallies in support of the troops were held nearby. And in Gaza, thousands of people took to the streets to demonstrate in support of the Iraqi people, but some in the crowd were also chanting support for Saddam Hussein. We'll keep on top of all the news that's happening right now, and that's all that we know right now at this hour. Let's go to Bill Hammer, standing by right now in Kuwait City. Hello, Bill.
Hey, Leon, hello again. And just a bit past 7 o'clock local time here in the Persian Gulf. You mentioned it. Let's go back to that live picture over downtown Baghdad. Eyewitnesses describe, and quite clearly you can see a dark, cloudy day. On the outskirts of Baghdad, some sort of dark smoke drifting on the horizon. Not clear what this is. Talking with a member of the Red Cross in the past hour, he described at least 2 or 3 explosions about 45 minutes ago. What they were, we cannot verify on their own. Also, some reports that Iraqis on the outside of Baghdad perhaps dug some ditches, filled them up with oil, then set them on fire. No way, again, for us to independently verify whether or not that is the case. From last night, I want to show you some pictures obtained by our CNN crew before they were expelled from Iraq. Nick Robertson, Reem Brahimi, and others took these pictures of the massive bombardment of the Iraqi capital. It looks almost as if these Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched in perfect synchronicity, a perfect succession to hit and explode at the same time last evening. And today we can see the aftermath in the daylight of Baghdad. We are told that the Republican Guard Palace, sitting on the Tigris River, heavily damaged. Some Iraqis say it is now in ruins. Also, government buildings were targeted, we know of, and also military installations as well in the Iraqi capital. From Baghdad now to Basra, southeastern part of the country, the second most populated town, about 400,000 people. Tommy Franks, head of CENTCOM, earlier today at his briefing, said that they're right now considering the possibility of taking this town in a very peaceful way, indicating that large formations of the Iraqi military have not been spotted, possibly an indication that the Iraqis will negotiate a surrender, but that is something we are all waiting to see right now. We had a CNN crew just outside that town earlier. CNN's Martin Savage coming under fire from a rocket-propelled grenade at one point, and U.S. Marines working through a number of old tanks and blowing them up along the way. We're going to get to Marty's report in a moment. It is dramatic that he filed with us today here at CNN. In the meantime, though, before we check in with Marty, Gary Stryker is in the Persian Gulf on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a carrier that we do know did take place in terms of Tomahawk cruise missile launches in the past 24 hours. Gary is embedded there. It's the first time we've heard from him. Gary, good evening. What do you have for us?
Hi, Bill. Some of those explosions that you're seeing around Iraq could actually be the explosions from air attacks that were launched from aircraft carriers here in the Mediterranean. There are 2 aircraft carriers, the Harry S. Truman and the Theodore Roosevelt. Here on the Roosevelt, the first air attacks against Iraq were launched earlier today, and all aircraft that left on the attack came back and reported a successful strike. There were 2 major targets they had in their mission. One of them was a complex of palaces, of Saddam Hussein's palaces west of Baghdad, complex called the Ar-Ramadi Palace. There were 2 palaces in that complex. The pilots at a post-strike briefing we talked to reported that both of those palaces were hit and destroyed. There was also an AM broadcast station which was hit and destroyed, and the pilots are preparing on this carrier for more strikes today. There will be strikes also leaving from the Harry S. Truman. This carrier is on nighttime duty, that means that airstrikes are being carried out from the Mediterranean on a 24-hour basis, Bill.
Yeah, Gary, when you talk about the damage and the destruction there, the military likes to call it BDA, battle damage assessment. How do they go about that on board the Theodore Roosevelt when it comes to assessing what was done on the ground in Baghdad?
Well, the pilots on board do have some equipment which allows them to assess damage on a preliminary basis, but I think they're waiting for other satellite and overflight assessments to make sure that the damage they reported is as complete as they say it is. One of the things they did mention, the two pilots we talked to when they came back, they were very surprised, considering the set of targets they had, that there was no resistance whatsoever. There was no anti-aircraft fire. There was nothing coming from the ground. There were no aircraft attacking them. That surprised them, considering the targets. And also, we asked them about the possibility of civilian losses. Did they see that these bombs that they dropped, which were JDAMs, GPS-targeted bombs, by the way, we asked them whether they possibly may have hit any surrounding areas. And one of the pilots said, well, this is one of the good things about hitting a presidential palace, because, in his words, Saddam Hussein does not like neighbors. So most of the palaces in Baghdad are surrounded by huge areas of open space, so the possibility of collateral damage is very, very slim. Bill?
Gary, on a professional note, this is the first time you and I have had a chance to talk. What are your rules of broadcast? What are your rules of information in terms of what you can relate to us? And when are you essentially in a blackout and when you cannot talk with us?
Well, we're able to watch the strikes being launched, to film the flights being launched on these air attacks, and we can wait for them to come back, and we have to sit tight during the course of the attacks during a blackout period before we can report that these strikes have occurred, because, of course, if we would report the time of departure of the aircraft, if there was any indication on the part of the Iraqis that there were certain targets to be hit, the Iraqis would be able to take defensive measures and offensive measures against the strike aircraft entering the country. So we are essentially in a blackout phase until those aircraft return. However, yesterday we were allowed a little bit of extra leverage in reporting, and we actually did report before the planes returned to the aircraft. Once they've left the country and are over blue water, when they get their feet wet, as they say here on the ship, we're free to report that the strikes have occurred, Bill.
Gary, thanks. Gary Stryker on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt in the Persian Gulf. We heard from Tommy Franks again about 2 hours ago, and we've also heard from our embedded reporters just about 24 hours a day around the clock. I want to talk with Colonel Mike Turner. Colonel Mike Turner from the U.S. Air Force, retired, a Gulf War veteran who back in 1990 and 1991 was in Saudi Arabia. Now living in Colorado Springs, and joins us live here on CNN. I know you were responsible in large part for briefing General Schwarzkopf throughout that entire conflict. Curious to know from your military perspective, what do you make of the embed program? What do you make of the images and the stories we're now getting long before even the Pentagon or even Central Command gets word of what's happening on the battlefield?
Well, Bill, I was watching these last night. They're astounding. It's astounding reporting. Incredible courage by the reporters. I have the utmost respect for them. You know, we tried very hard in Desert Storm to try and find a way to provide access to the media and not compromise the operational environment. And I know it was very controversial, the press pool system. We truly tried to do the best we could, and I remember being struck by the fact that while the information was limited, it was accurate. And I was also struck by how similar that was to General Franks' comments this morning, that what you'll hear and see is the absolute truth. But the embed program, I think, is just superb. Now, we need to understand that we haven't seen, the images could get pretty horrific if this operation turns south at any point, and we need to be prepared for that. But I think it's an enormous breakthrough. I applaud Secretary Rumsfeld and General Franks and the military commanders in the field and the units. And all the reporters. I think the media's done just a superb job, and I think we've actually found a very, very sound solution here.
Colonel, I think you make a great point, though. If the images turn nasty, if we move toward Baghdad and the fighting gets very tough and rough going, will there come a point when the Pentagon will reject this, there may come a point perhaps when they look back and say, you know, we should have second-guessed this operation?
You know, I don't know. I think the military's genuine desire is to provide an accurate and truthful picture. I think in that we in the media have a common ground. The overarching imperative, of course, for the military planners is that they protect lives and accomplish the mission simultaneously, and the media obviously has to take a back seat to that. It's difficult to say because this is all new ground. This is so untried before, this real-time reporting. But the impression I get, the body language of the troops on camera and of the reporters, is that they're all functioning as an effective combined arms team and information team. And so far, I think it's been extraordinarily successful and beneficial to everyone concerned. And just like the rolling campaign, we're going to have to take it a day at a time and play it by ear. But so far, I'd say it's a real breakthrough.
Colonel, just a little time left here with you. Tommy Franks came out for the first time in almost 72 hours. I know the personalities of Tommy Franks and Norman Schwarzkopf are very different. Can you tell us, number one, do you think it's a good idea to stay underground for 3.5 days, essentially, in Qatar? And what are the characteristics that you would point to that truly define the personalities of Tommy Franks versus General Schwarzkopf?
I don't know General Franks at all, other than from what I've seen on camera. I will tell you, though this may seem counterintuitive to a lot of viewers, that they both strike me as superb public speakers, as superb public representatives of the military effort. The public also needs to be aware of the fact that both General Schwarzkopf and I'm sure General Franks are driven primarily by the activities in the field, and they won't come to the camera unless they have an ebb in the action. Their principal concern is the operation.
Colonel Mike Turner with us live in Colorado Springs. Thank you for your time, reflecting back on 1990 and 1991. That's it from Kuwait City. Back to New York and more with Paula.
Thanks so much, Bill. I know you focused on this a little bit earlier this morning, and that is what Martin Savage endured with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marine. We're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, he's going to tell us what happened to him as he was embedded with these troops, and the men and women came under fire from a rocket-propelled grenade. That report straight out of the break.
The strike on Iraq continues, and no one takes you closer than CNN. Live throughout the day, stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news.
I know some interns who went the extra mile tonight. I'm one of them.
Whoa, very funny. Hey, turn the lights out. Oh boy.
Is somebody there?
Just the tech support night shift.
Yeah, everybody thinks just because Dell makes such reliable PCs, we just punch out at 5. But when someone does have a question, we are here 24/7, 365.
Yeah, that's what award-winning service and support is all about.
That's right. Someone's always around to help out. And let me tell you, we're certainly not afraid of the dark.
I'm a little afraid of the dark. Call it together, Snyder.
Get a Dimension desktop with a 17-inch monitor for just $599 after a $100 mail-in rebate. Featuring an Intel Pentium 4 processor for awesome performance for today's digital entertainment. Recording music, sharing photos, gaming, and beyond. And right now, you get a free digital camera. Get great deals on notebooks, too.
Sorry about that. There must be something wrong with the fuse or something.
Easy to buy, easy to own, easy as Dell. Dell PCs use Intel Pentium 4 processors.
CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Back to Baghdad now, where there's signs of yet another explosion. Eyewitnesses on the ground telling us they had heard 5 so far, those starting at dusk. It is not clear exactly what is going on here. From the Pentagon, we're told there are a couple of different theories because nothing has actually been confirmed so far. One idea is that much earlier today, in our 7 o'clock hour, that maybe a fuel depot was targeted, and there is another possibility. The Iraqis have dug some oil ditches And if they have done that and set them on fire, their goal would be to obscure laser-guided weapons. Now, the satellite-guided weapons wouldn't be threatened by this at all or affected by it, but the laser-guided weapons would be. We really don't know what we're looking at here, although we have seen a cloud of billowing black smoke. We've been watching it for the better part of 4 hours now. We have talked with a person from the Red Cross, a representative from the Red Cross, who also confirmed he heard the same explosions. We're going to keep an eye on this as we get a better context. I don't know if we have Barbara Starr up yet at the Pentagon to see if we can get any confirmation of this latest report of explosions. We do know that air raid sirens have not been sounded, according to the witnesses who witnessed these first blasts, although they did hear sirens of ambulances and police cars cruising through the city. That account reported to us about 45 minutes ago. But this latest report comes just moments ago of another explosion being heard in downtown Baghdad. Now, just to give you a perspective on this, what is being called a rolling campaign, the first 24 hours of shock and awe. Some 2,000 sorties are expected to be flown in the first 24 hours, 1,500 cruise missiles or bombs being dropped. Now I think we see tracer fire or anti-aircraft fire. Can't really make it out from this picture. That appears to be, I believe, anti-tracer or tracer fire. We have General Don Shepard, who's going to join us from CNN Center, who can much better recognize this than we can. Once again, just to give you an idea of the barrage that we saw yesterday at about 1 p.m. Eastern Time, a 7-minute barrage, very specific targets, we are told by General Franks, hit. There are additional targets, he said, that must be considered. He called the first day of the shock and awe campaign is going exceptionally well. General Franks saying the targeting that we had seen was precise, all involving precise munitions. He said no targets were selected that weren't entirely appropriate, and by that he meant that these are targets that were chosen to avoid non-combatants. We keep an eye on this. We see pretty much what we saw yesterday at 1 p.m. General Shepard, what do you think we're looking at here, sir?
Well, I think that we're looking at the beginning of a second day or a second night of bombing in downtown Baghdad, restriking targets that the daytime assessment said were not successfully struck, and then additional targets in the same area. I think this is just more of the pressure on the Iraqi leadership to say this is going to continue until you surrender or the regime is changed.
And what are you seeing visually? Was that tracer?
Yeah, that was tracer fire there. Now, what we've seen up until now is basically before the aircraft and bombs begin to impact, we see tracer fire starting. Now, there's a lot, doesn't mean that their radar is up or detecting stealth aircraft or anything of that sort. It means they've got some type of warning. The warning can come in many ways. People can see the cruise missiles launched from the ships, the Tomahawk missiles launched from the ship in the Persian Gulf, and do simple mathematics, distance equals rate times time, and assume when they can get there. When they see jamming starting to appear on their scopes, they know something is about to happen or suspect something's about to happen. And then, of course, they can also hear Tomahawk missiles, and they can hear aircraft as well. So this
Tell
is
us what follows the tracer fire, General. In the past, what we saw at about 1 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday was anti-aircraft fire coming from a number of different quadrants of the city, right?
Yeah, what it tells me is they have their anti-aircraft or their air defense system is still very sophisticated. They do sector fire, they control it, they start together, they stop together, they cover the right sectors of the sky at the same time, hoping that aircraft will flow into that, and they also fire missiles. The missiles don't seem to be guided as I've watched them launch, but it's still a robust and air defense system that's with command and control over it.
Is it sophisticated enough to know exactly what it's hitting, or they just fire a bunch of it and hope they strike something?
That's exactly what they do, Paula. They cannot see on their radars, and then many of the guns that they're shooting are not radar guided at all. They're simply firing into a sector of the sky, hoping that they spear something, the golden BB, if you will. And then, of course, at the end of the time of flight, you see flashes in the sky. That's when the shells self-destruct so they don't fall down on the homeland territory of those that are firing them. And that flak can also hit things. But the idea is to hit it with the bullet, and the destruction of the shells is peripheral.
General Shepard, stay here with us. I'm just going to quickly recap for our viewers what we are watching right now. We had heard 4 hours ago that there might have been the beginning of daytime or right at dusk a strike of a fuel depot. What we're seeing now is what the general describes as tracer fire followed by anti-aircraft fire. General Shepard, for those of us folks who were watching yesterday's time, this looks pretty similar in advance of that 7-minute barrage.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of notes on this. Tracer fire is anti-aircraft fire. Now, the lower level, when you see them low to the ground like that, is generally the lower caliber weapons. When you see them going up higher in the sky, are very tracers that last a long time. That's high caliber weapons that reach up to high altitudes. This is probably a combination of 37, 57, 85, and 100 millimeter anti-aircraft fire. These are Soviet guns that have existed since the Vietnam War and still exist. They're very, very lethal.
And what do you think they have more of, this lower caliber weapon or the higher caliber weapon?
Well, always you have more of the lower caliber weapon, but the lower caliber weapon hits things at low altitude. The aircraft and weapons attacking may or may not be at low altitude.
And we are watching this as we hear the call to evening prayer going on. General Shepard, I think a lot of people would like to know what it is that is left in downtown Baghdad to hit. The Iraqis claiming 19 different targets were hit yesterday. The Pentagon saying more than that. What is left to hit here?
A lot is left to hit in this area on the west bank of the Tigris. Let me give you a little tutorial, if you will, on that west bank. If you think of Washington, D.C., think of standing at the Pentagon and looking toward the Capitol, looking past the Lincoln Monument, up the mall to the Capitol, across to the Supreme Court. That's about the length of this area. And then think of looking left toward Georgetown. That's about the area that you're looking at, about a 2.5 square mile area, and there's lots left to hit in there, a lot of it perhaps underground. So I suspect we'll be restriking some of the targets and hitting new ones as well, Paula.
The air defenses are located, we are told, inside some highly populated areas. What kind of a challenge is that to work around?
It's a big challenge. Now, your fixed missile sites are going to be located probably in peripheral areas, not in the real populated areas, just because they're so big and complicated. The anti-aircraft guns themselves will be put on top of apartment buildings and that type of thing. Those going after the anti-aircraft will have to be very, very careful not to cause civilian casualties, and there are plans to deal with that type of thing in order. What you want to do first is you want to put out the radar eyes, you want to put out the fixed missile sites, then you go against the mobile missile sites. Later you take care of the anti-aircraft. You may or may not do it from the air, you may do it from the ground, Paula.
All right, joining us now, Colonel Mike Turner, to add to what we're seeing on the screen. Colonel Turner, what are you looking at?
Paula. Just to add to General Shepard's comments, my backseater in F-4s transitioned into F-111s and flew over Baghdad during Desert Storm. His reports from the cockpit on one of these raids were pretty amazing. The anti-aircraft shells explode, and when they get thick enough, if you happen to fly through them in a certain way, you can actually smell the cordite, the gunpowder from the puffs of these explosions coming through the air conditioning system of the aircraft. It's a pretty intense time, and even though it's barrage fire and unguided fire, as General Shepard said, the golden BB, as we used to call it, can still do some pretty serious damage. And
how threatening is that for pilots?
Well, obviously it's very threatening. The severe threat is radar-guided munitions, whether it's AAA or surface-to-air missiles. And at this point in the air campaign, I have to believe that we've shut down most of those systems. So this is unguided barrage fire. It tends not to be very accurate, and the threshold has been reduced dramatically of the threat to the air crews as they come by. So
for the folks that are just joining us, we are looking at what General Shepard believes to be another round of nighttime bombing here in Baghdad. General Shepard, we have been since 7 o'clock pretty much tracking a large black billowing cloud coming from a part of downtown Baghdad, and we never could get it confirmed from the Pentagon what that was. Some witness saying there was a daytime strike. You said it's possibility a fuel depot hit, but also there's a possibility that the Iraqis dug oil ditches to create a cloud of smoke to obscure laser-guided weapons.
It could be that these are some of the trench fires that we've been talking about, although it appears to me that it's a single plume coming up. That's what led me to believe that perhaps we struck a fuel depot for the Republican Guard forces. I just don't know. We're going to have to watch. Setting trenches on fire does affect laser-guided weapons. It does not affect satellite-guided weapons. I wanted to make another point on the AAA fire, if I could. Those of us who have been at this a long time have had a lot of experience with AAA. not only can you actually smell the cordite passing close to your airplane, but you can also hear and feel the rounds. It sounds like a thump on the side of your airplane. It's the sonic waves. If they pass close to your airplane, you can hear this thump, 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 thump passing, and you can also smell the cordite. This stuff is very, very dangerous and very thick, but the point I want to make is this is disciplined anti-aircraft fire. These guys know what they're doing. They're firing in sectors where they suspect that aircraft may be and may fly through it, so it's highly dangerous.
We watch this as we hear the evening prayer being called. General Shepard, the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you talk about how sophisticated the Iraqi air defenses are, and yet you say they're basically blanketing the whole sky and firing somewhat indiscriminately. What does it mean that we have seen this AAA fire always in advance of an attack? Do they know it's coming, or are they just acting protectively here?
A little bit of both, and this is not indiscriminate firing at all. They are telling them where, the command and control of this, the commanders of the air defense units are telling them what sectors to aim at. So if you've got several guns, you will tell them to cover various portions of the sky. You will tell them when to fire, and it's based on a good guess. Somebody will hear something, or it will be followed up, fire in this sector. They turn the fire on in that sector, then they turn it off to save ammunition and cool the barrels, then they reload. So this is again, well-disciplined fire from a sophisticated air defense system that's still very dangerous and have to be degraded over time.
I guess by indiscriminate I meant they really don't know exactly what they're firing at, but they have it very carefully calibrated so they hit all quadrants of the sky?
That's basically true. Now, when you say all quadrants, they probably know what sectors to expect that it's coming from based upon the inputs they're getting from telephone calls and reports on the ground, and they will turn on sectors. They don't necessarily blanket the entire sky, but they fire where their best guess is that weapons or aircraft are coming in from.
And what is the possibility they know exactly what is coming their way?
I don't think they do, but they, by just knowledge of military weapons, they know that it's Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles, and aircraft dropping bombs. Any air defender knows that.
Colonel Turner, we're going to bring you back into discussion here. We have had eyewitnesses saying they heard 5 large explosions within the last hour, and then a more recent report over the last 5 minutes of another loud blast. We see no evidence in the sky of that, do we?
No, but you know, we're dealing with an awful small sliver of information at this point, and so we have to take educated guesses. The way this is developed, this rolling campaign, if you will, is there's a target list developed by planners months in advance, and they work down the target list, and they're constantly assessing what the effects have been of the previous raids and what the battle damage assessment is on the previous targets, and they continue to work down that target list. And so it's difficult to tell where they are on the target list and what specifically they've struck. And of course, there is always the possibility that, in fact, it didn't come from the air; that it's some sort of operation on the ground by Iraqis, and just an awful small sliver of information at this point to work with.
Let's talk specifically, gentlemen, about the targets that might be included. General Shepard, you were talking about this a little bit earlier today: Republican Guard trenches, additional palaces, Ba'ath Party headquarters. What else?
Well, right now you're going to finish up on what you consider to be the command, control, and bunker targets, the ability to take out the eyes and communications of the leadership. Now, as we progress further into this campaign, what you're going to see is campaigns against deployed Republican Guard forces. These forces are probably well integrated in populated areas right now, but if they intend to oppose coalition forces that are coming toward Baghdad, they are going to have to assemble. And when they assemble, they're going to become targets. So you will watch that very carefully through all of your intelligence means, and then you will strike it when appropriate and take collateral damage into consideration, Paula.
Is there any doubt in your mind that we're about to witness another large barrage over Baghdad?
My guess is that we are. I'm guessing like everyone else, but it would make sense to do so.
Help us better understand the breadth of resources that are required for the coalition forces to pull this off. I had heard earlier today over 30 different bases are being used.
Yeah, this is an amazing thing to realize. Remember the last display that we witnessed yesterday was a 7-minute barrage, if you will. This 7-minute barrage was assembled from really 38 locations, including 30 various air bases, most in the region. Diego Garcia, the United Kingdom, and Whiteman Air Force Base, as well as all the bases in the region, and 5 aircraft carrier battle groups between the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and then destroyers, cruisers, and submarines. Now, all of this has to be orchestrated and timed so that it will arrive in accordance with the war plan. The last strike, it was within about 7 minutes. I have no idea if it comes what it will be this time. But orchestrating all of this, doing it between forces from different nations, making sure that the jamming is there on time, making sure that everything is coordinated. The air routes in are diplomatically okay. The air routes in are coordinated and deconflicted so that people don't run into each other. The air-to-air resources that are there to protect the strike forces don't shoot down our own airplanes. They are able to sort enemy aircraft from friendly aircraft. This is all absolutely unbelievable, and it comes from years of training, from very, very good equipment, and it's very, very difficult and very, very dangerous, and we will at some point lose some of the people doing this, Paul.
We're going to stick with this picture, General Shepard, and bring folks up to date. A giant plume of smoke rising into the night sky in downtown Baghdad at exactly 11:22 Eastern Time. That would be 7:22 local time in Iraq, following the latest reported explosions and a flurry of anti-aircraft tracer fire. Ambulances, we are told, have rushed to the scene of the blast. That pretty much mirrors what we have heard from a number of eyewitnesses over the last 20 minutes or so. Anything you want to add, General Shepard, to what we might expect?
Well, a couple of other things to look at. You see the lights are still on in downtown Baghdad, and that indicates to me that we're not destroying infrastructure. We have the ability to turn out the lights in the entire city for hours, days, weeks, months, and years. We have the ability to turn it out in sections of the city, and it appears that, at least so far, we have not done any of that. I think we will steer away from any infrastructure destruction as long as we can. If it becomes necessary to secure the objectives in the end, the forces will be careful. We'll take a look at the weapons. We'll take a look at what's nearby. We'll do everything possible to avoid civilian casualties because it only causes everyone problems. And I suspect that there will be some civilian casualties no matter what we do, but we'll try very hard not to do it.
General Shepard, stand by. I want to bring Bill Hemmer into our conversation, who in Kuwait City has endured a number of sirens going off, the all-clear sign called a while ago. Bill?
Yeah, Paula, I thought our reporters, two of them, have made some very good points over the past couple of hours. And I wonder if General Shepard and also if Colonel Turner can jump in on this. Nick Robertson described to us this morning when dawn broke in Baghdad about 5:30 local time. There were explosions, there were some sort of bombs delivered in the Iraqi capital, but that the air raid sirens were never signaled at that time. He said that was an exception to the rule. Anytime Iraqi airspace, Baghdad airspace, had been invaded by coalition aircraft or Tomahawk cruise missiles, the sirens always went off, but not that time. And he said that's the first time he's ever noticed it. And the other thing, Gary Stryker on board the USS Theodore Roosevelt, talking with these pilots who come back to that aircraft carrier, say the Iraqi defenses, the air defenses on the ground, are not nearly as strong as perhaps they were a day ago or a week ago, or even going back to the Persian Gulf War. I think the logic is pretty obvious here, but I don't know from the military standpoint what the answer is. Is it, Don, is it the fact that the command and control structure is now fractured, or is it that the defenses right now are much weaker than they have been in the past? Your assessment would be what?
Well, Bill, my conclusion on that is that sometimes the reason the sirens weren't turned on is sometimes you miss you miss a guess on that, and so they probably missed a guess. Most of the time they get some warning that something is coming, and they may just hear the first explosion and then turn them on. So I don't know what to make of that. I do assess that over time you will degrade the air defense system. And as Colonel Turner said, we've likely already grossly degraded the radar system and the radar-guided surface-to-air missiles, but the AAA will be there, the anti-aircraft artillery will be there for a long time. They're certainly not going to run out of ammunition anytime soon, so it'll be degraded, but it'll be dangerous for a long time, and the mobile missiles will be there for a long time, and the shoulder-fired missiles will be there for a long time. So it will be dangerous for aircraft to operate in the Baghdad vicinity for quite a while in the future, Bill.
If there was a breakdown in communication, though, would that help explain it? Is that a possibility anyway?
Sure, I can't draw any conclusions on that, but that's definitely a possibility. But it appears to me that everything I've watched is that the air defense network, command and control, is still intact. They're still able to talk to their forces.
All right, thank you, General. Paula, back to you now in New York.
Actually, I wanted to ask the General one more question, Bill, that you raised, which was a good one. And General, you basically said it'll be a long time before the Iraqis run out of this AAA fire. How long could they sustain it?
Well, the fire is heavy, but my suspicion is they've got a lot of ammunition stored. They've been able to plan this for a long time. several years, as a matter of fact. My guess is that they've got the ammunition to sustain their campaign for a long time. So again, the AAA, the anti-aircraft fire from guns on the ground, will probably be a danger all the way to the end. Shoulder-fired missiles and mobile missiles, which can be hidden in buildings, can be brought out at a moment's notice, just as we saw in the Serbia campaign. So we've got many miles to go, and Baghdad is going to be a difficult target if we have to go in there and fight.
All right, General Shepard, we're going to have you stay with us. We're going to quickly check in with Zainab al-Suwaij, who has family still in Iraq, and I want you, as we watch this play out on television, to tell us when's the last time you had contact with your family members in Iraq and what they've told you.
I spoke with my family a couple of days ago, and they are in Baghdad. They are doing fine, and other family members who they are in other parts, another state in Iraq, they said they are doing fine. In Baghdad, they said this time the fire is different than 1991. The civilians areas are pretty much secure, and it's not really there is not really a lot of bombing on civilians areas. Mainly they are targeting the government buildings. And they are people there are very happy and very optimistic that they're going to get rid of Saddam soon. And they said they asked me, when are you coming? We are waiting for you to come, and we were waiting to be liberated.
I understand you were kind of surprised about how open your family members were in phone conversations recently as opposed to a while ago, knowing that those phone calls are always monitored.
That's right. This is the first time, actually, I noticed that they are talking openly. Usually people, when we used to call and talk to people there, they always talk in codes. But now I think they're seeing Saddam Hussein's regime's end coming soon, and they are very happy and optimistic.
And you say there, it's pretty clear to them that military targets are what are being considered right now. How has this affected their daily lives? Are they honoring the curfew?
Well, there is a curfew around the city, and people are not allowed to leave Baghdad. And so most of them are staying home, and also there is not a lot of walking or doing any other activities during the day. They are basically in their homes and staying inside, and just to be safe. And the government officials really don't allow anybody to be out. So.
Zainab, we're seeing a lull in the anti-aircraft fire we have been watching for many moments now. We're going to keep our eye on that picture as we have heard confirmed reports of another explosion, I guess about 17 minutes ago in downtown Baghdad. Now that is on the heels of reports of another explosion at dusk. We will keep you posted, but clearly General Shepard is describing that the Iraqis expect another fierce barrage of coalition fire. Zainab, can you tell us what your family members have said about any of the strikes they've witnessed so far, either the first night, second, or third?
Well, they didn't. They said they heard about the bombs, but they haven't seen anything yet. As this about 2 days ago, and so far they are doing well. And I asked if anybody get hurt, or have you heard of anybody who's been injured or anything. They said no. Not yet, and they've been talking in the phone. The phone system is still working, functioning. It's very different than the first Gulf War, and even the electricity, it's still functioning. And so it's different this time, and they said they are contacting friends and family all around, and they are doing well, just fine.
I know you said they didn't see much of the explosions, but it simply has to be terrifying for them to hear what they've heard. What have they told you?
Sure, it's very frightening to hear about even the sound of the explosion. As I remember in 1991, I was there in the Gulf War, and it was pretty hard and difficult to live through the war. And but I'm afraid that was the only option we have now, and we had before. So. I hope everybody will be fine and not more civilian people get really hurt by this attack.
Zainab, I want to come back to you and talk about the liberation your family members expect, but I want to see if I have General Shepard back from CNN Center as we keep an eye on this picture. General Shepard, there seems to be a lull in the anti-aircraft fire we were witnessing before. What do you make of that? Again, I make of it that they don't have any intelligence that anything is incoming, no reports that anything is incoming. It seems pretty quiet there right now, Paula. They're probably on alert expecting something, though. All right, you stay with us, please, sir. We'll go back to Zainab now to follow up on a point you were making about your relatives. They were asking, when are they coming to free us? I know General Franks today in his news conference talked about we're not coming to Iraq to occupy it, we're coming to liberate it. How widely held of a view do you think that really is in Iraq right now?
I think the majority of the people notice that the American and its allies are coming to liberate Iraq from Saddam Hussein's regime, and they are not coming to occupy the country. And they are aware of this. They said they are family and friends. They said they are not afraid of the American or the allies coming to Iraq as much as they are afraid of Saddam Hussein's government. So they are waiting for the minute to be free and be liberated.
Zainab, we really appreciate your joining us today to give us a sense of how people in Baghdad are reacting to this campaign. Back to General Shepard right now. General Shepard, there were some really interesting things that came out of that news conference of CENTCOM today out of Qatar, and I thought it was worth mentioning that General Franks used the word agile. Am I hearing the sirens go off there? No, I'm not making that out there, but mentioned the word agility and flexibility a number of times. How important is that to this campaign? Well, it's extremely important, Paula. We've seen a couple of really good examples of that so far. One of them is that the air campaign was supposed to kick off first. Instead, the ground campaign kicked off first, followed by the air campaign. Second, the hit on the emerging target, the leadership decapitation target in, by the way, a populated area of downtown Baghdad, was an example of being able to put things together very, very quickly. And then a couple of other examples, the strikes on the tugboat, the mine-laden tugboat, the Navy, the taking of the port of Qasr by British commandos working with Navy SEALs and United States commandos supported by air, and we reportedly, from some sources, AC-130 gunships. All of that being orchestrated is flexibility displayed at its best. General Shepard, we're going to bring Bill into the conversation now from Kuwait City. Bill?
Yeah, Paula, listen, just watching the images from last night. Don, stick with me for a moment here. I thought one of the more indelible sights was that huge plume of smoke that went straight up in the air. Looked like it went upwards of 100 stories in the air. Our military experts on this side of the ocean tell us that that could have been, and I don't mean to undermine the size of this missile, but a 2,000-pound Tomahawk missile could have created that. It was my impression that you need something much larger to get that image, to get that plume of smoke to go so high. Is it possible, though, that it was only, and I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, only a 2,000-pound bomb?
It is, Bill. There's a couple things that affect that. All the reports that we have from the military are that nothing larger than a 2,000-pound bomb was used yet. And that would be logical, because if you used a 5,000-pound bomb, basically non-stealthy airplanes would have to carry that 5,000-pound bomb, and I don't think you're going to use non-stealthy airplanes over Baghdad right now. You're going to use cruise missiles or stealthy aircraft. So I believe it's a 2,000-pound bomb, and what affects that type of thing is what it hits and how deep the fusing goes. So you can get all sorts of plumes of varied sizes, and you can't draw any real conclusions about the size of the weapon just by looking at the explosion or the plume.
Don, thanks. Paula, listen, I've been on the air here for about the past 9 hours. I'm going to step out very soon, in a matter of minutes, actually, and I guess you and I will do it all over again tomorrow on Sunday, so I'll see you then. In the meantime, Wolf's going to step in here in about 12 minutes. In fact, he's coming into the room right now. Before I go, though, Paula, we have seen an extraordinary day on behalf of another one of our embedded teams, Marty Savage and Scott McWhinney, working with the Marines now. Earlier today, we saw them in these live reports that were just downright fascinating, to be quite honest with you. We saw them live, moving through this village on the outskirts of Basra. For the sake of our viewers, we want to play portions of what Marty filed for us earlier today. Have a look and a listen about what they found in this village, again, on the outskirts of the southeastern city of Basra.
The 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, on the move once more. We're riding with them. This is our vehicle in conjunction with a convoy heading west now, leaving Basra behind us and the main oil field objective that they captured yesterday. But speaking of oil, take a look out the window here as we travel along. There, the brilliant orange plume. It seems to be a key indicator of an oil well that was set alight. There are said to be about 9 oil wells burning in this part of southern Iraq, nowhere near as bad as the projections some had made about the scorched earth policy of Saddam Hussein. And now take a look forward. This is the convoy, mostly made up of Marines of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. That vehicle right there, an AAV, an amphibious assault vehicle. This convoy is heading off west to a new objective. So far, we haven't been told what that is, but eventually the goal is going to be all the way to Baghdad. For the Marines here, these amphibious vehicles work just as well in the desert as they do in water, and they're doing just fine on the highway, a highway that is shared with a lot of military might, all moving up from northern Kuwait and farther into Iraq. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in southern Iraq.
Martin Savage, pretty harrowing when he described that rocket-propelled grenade just whizzing over their heads. Fortunately, as he said, no one was hurt. Back in this country now, the home front. Let us take you to a town near the Army's Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It is on the border of Tennessee. In Clarksville, Tennessee, anxious families watch and await the return of their friends and family serving in the war. David Mattickley has been talking with some of the people there, and he joins us now. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Paula. In and around Fort Campbell this morning, after days of watching intense war coverage, people here in bad need of some comfort food. We're at the IHOP where it seems that what the doctor ordered is a big stack of pancakes for a lot of people. And we've been talking to them about the coverage that they have seen and been going through. These ladies right here are both former military. You've been watching the coverage. Is it helping you get through this, or is it maybe making you more anxious?
I think a little bit of both, David. Yeah, the coverage has been intense. But at least I get a better feel of what's going on and how how the 101st is playing such an integral role.
Now, you served in the Persian Gulf after the first Gulf War, and you have a son who could be deployed now.
Yes, I do. I have a son who's in the Marine Reserves here in Nashville.
How do you feel about the coverage?
Pardon?
How do you feel about the coverage? Is it making you more anxious knowing that he could be going over?
Not really, because I was there, so I know what our soldiers are doing over in the war. I hope for their safe return and that the war could be over quickly, as soon as possible. Okay. But I'm sure they do an excellent job. They know what they're doing, and they'll come out well.
All right, thank you very much. And Paula, we're going to go back to you right now. This is a very indicative of the opinions around here. People watching, but sometimes they have to turn it off and maybe get a chance for them to breathe and go about their daily lives. So a very anxious time for everyone there. Know that the 101st Airborne is on the move because of this coverage. Everyone anxious to find out what happens next. Paula.
Thank you so much, David. Meanwhile, we need to talk about some of the war protests that are going on, in particular here in New York City today. That's where we find Maria Hinojosa. She's here with a preview of their plans. Maria, good morning.
Good morning, Paula. Well, I have to tell you, it seems the march is supposed to start in about 5 minutes, and large crowds are amassing literally in the middle of Midtown. We are on 34th Street and Broadway. Organizers said they expected tens of thousands of people to come out to the streets of Manhattan and say that they are against this war. And what I can tell you is what I'm seeing now is lots of people here, lots of police. But I did want to bring in some people who are going to be leading the march. Both of these women, Dawn Peterson and Colleen Kelly, are members of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. They both lost their brothers on September 11th, and they are both against this war. Colleen, what's going on for you now that this war has started?
Well, I'm here today because I am anti-war, and I'm not anti-troops, I'm not anti-government, I'm not anti-people, but I'm opposed to this war, and I'm opposed to the way our country's responding. I just think there's much better solutions and alternatives.
And for you, Dawn, I'm just wondering, you're a new member of September 11th Family, so what's going on for you? You just have gotten involved in this anti-war movement, and yet you're probably thinking about your brother as well.
Well, actually, I've been involved in the anti-war movement from the get-go and just sort of hooked up with Peaceful Tomorrows recently. For me, it was just essential to start speaking out and not see September 11th used as a reason to go and further American agendas in the Middle East.
And as as you're watching what's happening in Baghdad, what's happening inside for you?
It's totally devastating. I mean, the fact that we can have, we now say that we've been attacked and we've seen that happen on our own soil, and we can further and to use shock and awe techniques. We know what shock and awe is like. How can we further this, these horrible, horrible atrocities? It's unreal.
Colleen, very quickly, do you really think that this anti-war movement can have any impact now at all, though?
I don't think it's just about anti-war. I think what people are most upset about is the direction of foreign policy, and that's certainly going to continue into the future, regardless of what happens with the war in the present.
Okay, thank you very much. Both of these women both lost their sons. They're going to be starting off leading this demonstration, which, as you see, has already begun. It's probably going to be quite large, Paula. Probably, they're saying, will be very calm, lots of families, but there have been arrests in past demonstrations in New York City, so we shall see what happens. Paula.
I just saw an aerial shot of the canyon created by these protesters, and it really is hard to get a sense of just how many people are out there today. Maria Hinojosa, thanks so much. As we close out this hour, we want to look at that picture of downtown Baghdad once again. At about 11:22 Eastern Time, we got reports of yet another explosion being heard. That's on top of the 5 that were reported already. That was followed by what we saw as a flurry of Iraqi anti-aircraft fire, which now appears to be in a lull. General Shepard, our expert on the ground at CNN Center, suggesting this may be coming in advance of yet another aerial barrage from coalition forces. We have been told by the Pentagon to expect in the first 24 hours of the shock and awe campaign that got underway at 1 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, at least 2,000 sorties, 1,500 cruise missiles, bombs launched. We'll be keeping a very close eye on the sky. As we look now, we don't see, or at least I don't see, any evidence of Iraqi anti-aircraft fire now. As we close out the hour, the momentous events unfolding now in Iraq are being captured on film by war photographers. Here now are some of their snapshots of the war so far.
I think arthritis can change the way you perceive yourself, if you let it. The trick is, don't let it.
Move over or leave. This is Tylenol arthritis pain. A different Tylenol. Just 2 caplets in the morning have the strength to last all day, with safety that can't be beat.
Arthritis pain? Don't we have better things to do?
It's another business day, filled with meetings and memos and migraines. But amidst this tornado of stress, there is an island of calm called Pip Printing. You can relax and rely on Pip Printing to handle important jobs like brochures, presentations, newsletters, and manuals with the quality and speed of digital technology to meet your deadlines with work that'll make you proud. Pip Printing will help you keep pace. Does your business need printed sales and marketing materials? Visit pip.com.
I'm Leon Harris at the CNN Center in Atlanta, and here's what's happening at this hour in the strike on Iraq. The U.S.-led coalition is moving against its targets and objectives on its terms and its timelines. That's the word we get from CENTCOM leader General Tommy Franks. He said this in his first public comment since the war got underway. Franks' briefing included some video clips from the battlefield. You see some of that video here. This is demolition of an Iraqi observation post. Total devastation there. Sirens, smoke, and new explosions to report in Baghdad now. Thick columns of black smoke continue to rise over parts of the Iraqi capital. The source of this smoke is not totally clear at this point, and we don't know yet what's been struck in these on-again, off-again bombing runs that started up again about 90 minutes ago. We also learned a short while ago that 4 U.S. soldiers were killed in fighting in central Iraq. This report comes from a reporter with Britain's Sky News who was traveling with the military unit. He says that rocket-propelled grenades hit the Humvees that the soldiers were in. Some 160 miles south of Baghdad, the 307th is bogged down. CNN's Walter Rogers says that the 3rd U.S. Army Squadron of the 7th Cavalry encountered a small but determined band of Iraqi defenders, and a tough little battle, in Walt's words, ensued. That battle dragged on for hours, but it ended after the GIs called in for some air support. CENTCOM says that the southern Iraqi town of Nasiriyah is now in coalition hands this hour, and that gives the troops an important crossing over point over the Euphrates River as they make their way toward Baghdad. In the southern Iraqi port city of Qasr, mopping up operations are said to be underway, a day after Iraq's only gateway to the Persian Gulf fell to the U.S. and the Brits. The Brits say Iraqi troops who are still fighting are wearing civilian clothing and using, quote, guerrilla tactics. And in London this hour, tens of thousands who want to bring British troops home are trying to stage the UK's biggest ever wartime peace demonstration. Big as it is, it's a fraction of the UK's biggest ever peacetime peace demonstration. That was last month. More than 1 million marched against war. You're seeing here live pictures that we have in from London of this demonstration. I'm sorry, this is New York. This is the demonstration that's being it's actually taking place right now in New York, and New York is not the only city. There were a number of cities across the U.S. in which these demonstrations are being staged. We'll have more on that for you later on, but these are the headlines that we have for you right now at this hour. Now, let's go to Wolf Blitzer and Paul Azan.
History. A campaign characterized by shock, by surprise, by flexibility, by the employment of precise munitions on a scale never before seen, and by the application of overwhelming force.
General Tommy Franks, the man leading the military campaign against Iraq, his first comments since the fighting began. Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer reporting live from Kuwait City.
Hi, Wolf, and I'm Paul Azan in New York. Welcome to another hour of CNN special coverage of the strike on Iraq. Wolf?
Thanks very much, Paula. We're going to go right away to Baghdad. There are fresh explosions, additional bombs within the past few hours. Indeed, throughout the day, the first time, in fact, there have been bombing strikes in daytime. Now it's nighttime, obviously, here in the Persian Gulf, here in the region, certainly over Baghdad. Bombs continuing to drop on selected targets in and around Baghdad, presumably elsewhere around the country. We're going to continue to show you these pictures of what's going on in Baghdad. Get there and try to describe precisely what's happening. Try to go throughout the country where the U.S.-led military campaign is taking advantage of apparent Iraqi confusion, some disarray in the Iraqi leadership. Let's go where the action is right now, though, on the front lines. U.S. Marines with the 1st Battalion, 7th Division are back on the move after coming under fire outside the Iraqi city of Basra. At the time, they had stopped to destroy about a dozen abandoned Iraqi tanks. Our Martin Savage is with them.
The 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, on the move once more. We're riding with them. This is our vehicle in conjunction with a convoy heading west now, leaving Basra behind us and the main oil field objective that they captured yesterday. But speaking of oil, take a look out the window here as we travel along. There, the brilliant orange plume. It seems to be a key indicator of an oil well that was set alight. There are said to be about 9 oil wells burning in this part of southern Iraq, nowhere near as bad as the projections some had made about the scorched earth policy of Saddam Hussein. And now take a look forward. This is the convoy, mostly made up of Marines of the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. That vehicle right there, an AAV, an amphibious assault vehicle. This convoy is heading off west to a new objective. So far, we haven't been told what that is, but eventually the goal is going to be all the way to Baghdad. For the Marines here, these amphibious vehicles work just as well in the desert as they do in water, and they're doing just fine on the highway, a highway that is shared with a lot of military might, all moving up from northern Kuwait and farther into Iraq. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in southern Iraq.
Clearly, there are impressive U.S.-led military gains as forces move towards Baghdad, but there are also significant dangers. Let's go immediately to the Pentagon. Our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, for an update. Barbara?
Wolf, a lot of details beginning to emerge from here. There are reports emerging that A-10 aircraft, U.S. Air Force A-10 aircraft, have been now on Scud hunting missions, looking for those Scud missiles and launchers in Iraq. The last word we had was that most of these Scud hunting missions were going to take place over western Iraq, where the U.S. had always believed that Saddam had hid about 24 Scud missiles and some launchers. So early word that the A-10 aircraft have now been on Scud hunting missions, and we're awaiting some results. There is the possibility that they have engaged some targets, but no confirmation of that. We also have some new statistics to tell you. Since 4 o'clock Eastern Time here in the United States on Friday, yesterday, when shock and awe officially began, 2,000 coalition sorties, air missions. 1,000 of those were strike missions, essentially combat missions. Sources telling us virtually all U.S. Air Force fighter and bomber assets being used in those missions. Now, there is also a lot of activity over northern Iraq, as we understand it. Aircraft have now struck a suspected chemical weapons compound in Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq. That was under the control of a radical Kurdish group called Ansar al-Islam, and there had been allegations by the Bush administration that this compound was also tied to Al-Qaeda elements. In addition, the 4th Infantry Division now will move its combat equipment from 36 ships in the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal, around into Kuwait. The 4th Infantry Division now really out of the opening hours of the fight. It will become a follow-on force in the days and weeks ahead. U.S. is also watching Turkish military movements very closely at this hour. They do know that Turkish armor infantry lined up along the border with Iraq. The suspicion, the assessment here is that those Turkish military units are lined up to prevent a flow of Kurdish refugees from northern Iraq into Turkey. Now, Tommy Franks earlier today saying that the campaign is going well, saying that he had no idea whether Saddam Hussein is dead or alive, but even if he knew, that would not change the campaign at all, that they are really going against the leadership of Iraq, and they plan to continue that. Sources telling us that there are many leadership targets in Baghdad still to be struck. Wolf?
Barbara, the extent of Iraqi opposition resistance to the U.S.-led military campaign, General Frank said about 1,000 or 2,000 POWs already. We heard one Iraqi division has surrendered. What are you hearing about the extent of the Iraqi resistance?
Well, they are seeing some as ground forces begin to move north as they get closer to Baghdad. That had been expected. There is some sporadic resistance. It's important to note the official surrenders that have happened so far are simply with the regular Iraqi army units. These are the conscript units that had been in the south. It had always been expected that they would not put up much of a fight. The key question will be, when does the 1st Republican Guard Division officially surrender? That would be much more representative of some sort of crack in the Iraqi military, in the leadership. The Republican Guard, of course, being the units most loyal to the regime of Saddam Hussein. So far, that hasn't happened. There, it is the fog of war right now. There are also reports that the Republican Guard commander known as Chemical Ali, the man who is the most tied to the potential use of chemical weapons, that he may have been killed in one of these opening attacks. No absolute confirmation, but those rumors continue. So it will really unfold in the hours and days ahead as the attack continues, whether there will be stiff opposition or not. But the reports, for example, earlier today, 4 U.S. soldiers killed in some sort of rocket attack, that's what worries the Pentagon a great deal, that their soldiers may come under this relatively small, intermittent fire. That's going to be very tough to deal with. If it was force on force, large unit against large unit, that they know they can deal with. They're very concerned about these small, random attacks. Wolf?
And Barbara, before I let you go, Chemical Ali, for our viewers who may not be familiar, Ali al-Majid, he's the Iraqi military leader who's believed to have ordered chemical attacks against the Kurds at Halabja in 1988. Right now, I want to put on the screen these pictures of what's happening in Baghdad. From everything you're hearing, this new wave of daytime and now nighttime U.S. bombing strikes against targets in Baghdad. More of the same, or are they different than what we saw yesterday?
From sources we have spoken to, so far, Wolf, more of the same. Sources telling us there is still a long target list to be gotten through, a target list of leadership facilities around Baghdad. There's no indication here so far that there would be any lull, any pause in the bombing. They say they have a long target list to get through. The fact that we may not be seeing anything in these camera pictures of Baghdad at this time may not be indicative of what is going on across the country. It is our understanding that airstrikes are continuing across the country, air defense, command and control, communications, all of that. Certainly a lot left on the target list.
Any briefings expected at the Pentagon this afternoon?
Indeed, Wolf, there is talk, very tentative at the moment, but talk in the hallways of some sort of operational update late this afternoon, Washington time, possibly 4 or 5 o'clock Washington time here. They haven't really settled, on a routine briefing schedule with this 8-hour time difference between Washington and the Persian Gulf. We may begin to see 2 briefings a day, one in Qatar to start the day and one to wrap it up here. But that will also depend on how events unfold.
Barbara Starr at the Pentagon. We'll be getting back to you 24 hours from now. I'll be having a special interview with the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld Sunday, noon Eastern, on a special late edition. Barbara Starr, thanks very much. In this military campaign, Turkey has been a source of frustration for the United States. First over the use of its airspace, now over whether Turkish troops should go into Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq. For his country's perspective, we turn now to Farouk Loalu. He's Turkey's ambassador to the United States. Mr. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us. Let's get to some specific issues on the agenda right now. Have Turkish forces moved into northern Iraq?
The short and definitive answer is no. Both the Turkish Foreign Minister and the Turkish General Staff have stated that these reports are not true. What is true is that Turkey has troop concentrations along the Iraqi border. There has been for some years some presence, Turkish presence in northern Iraq in the context of our fight against terrorism. And finally, this is a subject under discussion with the United States authorities.
Do you plan on moving Turkish troops into northern Iraq anytime soon? And if you do, what would be the purpose?
The exclusive purpose would be to address the humanitarian crisis that is fast emerging there. And this on the basis of our past experience with the Gulf War. We want to make sure that the Iraqi refugees are taken care of inside Iraqi territory. That's our primary purpose.
But so far, has there been a flood of Iraqi refugees trying to get into neighboring Turkey?
No, but there has been a lot of movement from different parts of Iraq into northern Iraq, and that's where we want to be prepared for that eventuality, so that it stays there.
Are U.S. warplanes now flying over Turkish airspace to go after selected targets in Iraq?
I cannot confirm that, but the entire infrastructure for overflights is there. Whether actual flights have taken place as of this moment, I just don't know.
As you know, for almost a dozen years, U.S. planes have been patrolling the northern no-fly zone, planes that take off and land at the Incirlik air base in Turkey. Are U.S. warplanes still taking off from that air base to go after targets in the so-called northern no-fly zone of Iraq?
No, they are not. With the onset of military action against Iraq, that Operation Provide Comfort has legally come to an end.
As you know, the U.S. military, the U.S. government has given up on the notion of getting U.S. ground forces into Turkey to move against targets in northern Iraq. Originally, they wanted some 62,000 U.S. troops to be based in Turkey. They're now moving supplies away, ships away.